for no problem. Thank you for joining for our 4th Rules Advisory Committee meeting for the groundwater allocation rules. I'm Annette Leva and I'm the Technical Services Division Administrator here at the department. We are going to start with introductions, and I would like to please start with the RAC members who are joining us electronically via Zoom. And so I am going to go through based on how I see the names in order. Just a minute, please. All right, Greg, we will start with you, please. Can you all hear us?
Also on mute.
Greg, you are muted. I was hoping you could please start the introductions. There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Operator error here. Yes, I'm Greg Capillis with Pacific Hydrogeology.
Thank you. Dave Wildman, please.
Yes, I'm Dave Wildman with Anderson Perry and Associates over here in Eastern Oregon.
Thank you. Kelly Warren.
Kelly Warren, CTUIR.
Thank you. Lauren.
Hi, Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau.
Thank you. Misty. Misty, you are muted if you are introducing yourself. No. Okay. Misty Buckley is a homeowner from the Klamath Basin. Phil.
Yeah, this is Phil Brown. I'm a hydrogeologist with Northwest Groundwater Services.
Robin.
Good morning, Robin Cook, GSI Water Solutions in Portland.
Casey. Casey, are you available to introduce yourself, please? I see Casey McClellan with Seven Hills Winery has joined, but is apparently unable to introduce himself right now. Doesn't have a mic. April.
Good morning, April Snell, Oregon Water Resources Congress. I will be joining by phone today, but we'll be listening in. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any Rules Advisory Committee members online whom I missed? Okay, let's start in the room then to my left.
Good morning, everybody. I am Adam Sussman with GSI Water Solutions. I'm here on behalf of COCO, the Central Oregon Cities organization that serves potable groundwater to over 150,000 people in Central Oregon.
Jeff.
Jeff Stone, Executive Director of the Oregon Association of Fisheries. We're the largest sector of agriculture.
Susan Smith.
Jen Hubert, the Chute River Conservancy in Bend, Oregon. Lisa Brown with Water Watch of Oregon.
Good morning, Zach Freed with the Nature Conservancy.
Tammy Wood, representing Oregon Lakes Association.
Bill Jager, Department of Applied Economics at Oregon State University.
Thank you. And in addition to myself, on behalf of the department, we have
Justin Iverson, I manage the groundwater section.
Laura Hart, Water Policy Analyst and Rules Writer.
And Ben Scandella, groundwater data chief.
And I'm Regina Eastman. I'm with Northwest Region Assistant Water Master.
Okay. Are there any Rules Advisory Committee members who have joined us online since we did introductions? Let me take a quick look here. Does not look like it. So, okay, let's start. Oh, and I forgot the icebreaker, but that's okay. We have a lot of work to do today, so I won't ask you whether you're a cat or dog person. We can do that next time.
There's only one right answer.
We'll find out what the right answer is at our next meeting, Jeff. So again, just restrooms, water fountain out the door. Restrooms are to the left. Water fountains to the right. We will take a break approximately at 10 and then 11:20. We will have our public comment at 11:30. So for those of you who are members of the public who have joined, if you could please hold your comments until then, we'd appreciate it. Feel free to grab a snack or some coffee at any time. You all should have received quite a few materials for this meeting. If you want hard copies for those people in the room, they're over there on the table. And as we did last time, before we adjourn today, I'm going to go through and kind of ask everyone for their feedback. If you haven't, so if you haven't spoken up during the meeting, expect that we'll do kind of a roundtable at the end of the meeting. So with that, just a quick review of our agenda. All right, so we did send out the meeting summary for meeting 3. We made corrections to the meeting summary from meeting 2 based on the feedback we received last time. We did also send out comments that we received both from meeting 2 and meeting 3. Justin's gonna kind of talk about how those comments were addressed or considered as he goes through the rules. We've got a really nice flow chart, especially if you have young eyes, that is an overview of the process based on the changes to the rules. That is this document for anybody who needs it. And then we're going to walk through the rules. And at the end, we'll also get some feedback from you on how we approach the fiscal and economic impact statement and the racial equity statement. And then we will have public comment and we'll do wrap up the next steps. So any questions before we get started? Okay, thank you. I am going to turn it over. Well, okay, so I already said that we made corrections, I think, based on some comments people made to the draft meeting summary for RAC 2. We made corrections and posted it online. Should you have additional corrections that you would like to request, please let us know. You also received a meeting summary for the 3rd RAC meeting. Are there any comments or questions on the meeting summary for the 3rd RAC meeting? Go ahead, Bill.
Bill Jager, Oregon State. I wasn't able to attend that meeting. I don't know if it may be the case that the Zoom, there was a recording that was posted somewhere, but I didn't go looking for it. But I found these really helpful for someone who didn't attend the meeting to get a sense of all the things that went on. So thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. I just want to shout out to Ben and Laura who are working to summarize these meetings. So thank you.
The meeting recordings are also posted online. So we convert them to YouTube and then they're on our website.
Any other comments about the meeting summary? Okay. All right, let's move on.
Okay. So Annette pointed out this flow chart. Folks in the room have a printed copy. I realize you can't see it on the screen.
Can we make it bigger?
I don't know that we
Adam, do you have it?
can.
I do, but I can barely read it.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I can't.
yeah.
Yeah, I can actually.
Can we make it bigger?
So we will certainly, so this is, as it says at the top right, this is a draft. This is our, well, it's not our first cut attempt, but this is our current iteration of mapping out how the Division 300 water is available definition splits along 3 flow paths. I'll talk more about that as we talk about the rule revisions. I'm going to use this as a map to help try and keep people oriented to the linkages between the rules. So I'll explain it as I go. I'll kind of show on the screen what vertical column we're in. And I'm happy to answer any questions if folks are squinting too hard, and we will continue to iterate on this to get the text size up and use the white space more effectively with some professional illustrators as opposed to us hacking it out with free online tools. So with that, I just want to acknowledge this, give people a chance to grab one if people in the room need to grab one, they're on the back table. And if folks online need to grab one, it should be in an email that Laura sent out to you last week, or you can get it online on our rulemaking website. All right, so with that,
So can we spend just a second on this? Sure. So what you'll see across the top is water is available is really broken into 3 main criteria. The first one being groundwater levels are reasonably stable. So we'll talk through those rules, reasonably stable. And then the second criterion is that the proposed use will not cause interference, substantial interference, or undue interference. So that's the second criterion related to water is available, and we've got rules that we'll go through related to that. And then the third one on the right is that the use is within the capacity of the resource. So those are the 3 main criteria linked to water is available. And then there are rule divisions that define each of those. So just as an overview, that's where we're headed today.
all right. So with that, let's step through the revised draft rules. So just in general, we made some updates to the updated rules. I'll step through each of those. I'm not going to rehash anything that we had previously changed and went over in RACs 2 or 3, but haven't changed since then unless there's questions on those things. So first, I want to start out with just a reminder again of the objective from the commission, which is to update our groundwater allocation rules to be more sustainable and protective of existing water right holders, both in stream and out of stream. I'll just put in a pitch when and if RAC members or public commenters are commenting, always helpful to us if you can link your comments to this overall objective to help us communicate to the commission how the comments address this overall objective. And a guide to how the presentation slides are put together when we go through the rule language and the proposed edits. So black text is current rule language. Anything in red text is proposed new or revised rule language. Anything that we've struck through and we've turned it gray to help readability, that's deleted rule language, and that might be deleted, proposed new text or deleted current text, could be either. And the yellow highlights are what we're going to focus on today. So those are the new changes since the last draft of the rule handout set was provided to the RAC. So those are things that have changed since our last meeting 3 weeks ago. Okay. All right, so with that, let's jump in. So again, I should pause here and just give one more big overarching statement, which is that today what we're trying, our goal today is to step through with the RAC all of the rule changes in all of the divisions and show how they fit together. We did receive a comment about, hey, can we see examples of how this will work in practice in an actual groundwater review. And we are planning to do that, but at the next RAC. So RAC number 5 is when we have mapped out that will provide, hey, here's our draft proposed rules. Hypothetically, if these were the rules going forward, this is how we believe we would implement them on a groundwater review form with, you know, stepping through our actual, not actual, but a hypothetical analysis. So how these would be implemented in practice with a new application. Okay, so that'll be our goal for our next meeting, RAC number 5. Or a focus of, I should say.
Before we get started,
Mhm.
I want to acknowledge, we have at least one RAC member that has joined us. Cheyenne, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, my name is Cheyenne Holiday. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Energy, Climate, Transportation Manager at Verde, based in Portland, Oregon.
Thank you. Are there any other Rules Advisory Committee members who have not introduced themselves? Okay, there's a question in the chat for when is the Rules Advisory Committee meeting number 5? You should have a hold the date for August 2nd. Thank you, Justin. At this same time.
Okay, so we're gonna start with division 300. In our map here, this is the uppermost overarching umbrella. Division 300 provides definitions of terms for division 310 through 340 or 50. And we are specifically focused on just one portion of that rules, which is paragraph 57, water is available. And we have taken RAC input regarding both definition circularity, as well as our kind of one of our initial goals to edit at the highest rule echelon possible. And we have revised this definition since the last RAC to be more direct about what exactly is water is available. So we've split it into 3 specific definitions. Each of those corresponds to one of the columns on the flow chart here. So on the far left, water is available. We've proposed to define as where water levels are reasonably stable. That points to a division 8 definition of reasonably stable. With surface water won't cause substantial or undue interference or further impairment. That process is described in the division 9 rules. And from a physical source of water to wells perspective, that addresses water that's derived from capture of groundwater that would otherwise flow to become surface water base flow. And lastly, we've maintained the kind of existing part of the definition that says within the capacity of the resource. That's defined in division 400. That's a more forward-looking assessment as opposed to the first 2, which are what are the conditions right now at the time that we're looking at any particular application review. And that maintains the definition of that the use would sustain a balance of uses that would maintain the function and character of the resource. Okay, so with that, we'll step through the actual rule language. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just sort of high level comments on 300. The first is to inquire whether you considered consolidating all of the definitions with respect to availability right up top there in 900. Sometimes it's easier if people have all of the definitions together and they don't have to kind of unpack.
Yeah.
I can see either way, but I just wanted to find out if you thought about that and, you know, and come to the conclusion that you should have separate definitions.
Yeah, so yes, we thought about it, and yes, we came to the conclusion that we should leave them where they are. This preamble being one of them, right? The following definitions, this is the topmost part of Division 300. It says that they apply to, 15.310, yada yada through 350. And also because at least in Division 8, that is titled statutory groundwater terms. So we've tried to keep any terms that are used in statute that we've defined in rule for more clarity or precision in Division 8. And those are two reasons why we left them where they are.
The other question is, I love the structure in terms of, okay, you've got 8 and then you've got 9 and whatever it is, 400. Very nice structure. It is straightforward until you get into 9.
Yeah.
And 9 mushes 8.
Yep.
Into 9. And so that's a little awkward. If there's a way around that, great. If there's no way, I understand.
And I mean, I don't want to say there's no way, but so 400 does the same thing. Both of them point back to 8, and that's because both of them point to statutory terms, and those statutory terms we've kept all in Division 8. So. Yeah, go ahead.
Potential ridiculous question word. Jeff Stone, OAN, see?
Thank you, Jeff.
Learn.
Get the gold star this morning.
Suck up, right here. All right, so when you say review, I mean, is it just water resources reviewing it, or remember my earlier statements about other agencies weighing in on a number of different factors? So does that include the broader suite of agencies who would participate in that kind of review?
Can I add, I want to make sure I understand your question. So
do I.
when, are you asking, when we're reviewing the way this is structured, whether or not we have incorporated review from other agencies? Maybe I'll answer your question and you can tell me if it is or is not an answer.
Great.
So we do have an interagency team, which includes, ag, fish and wildlife, environmental quality, OHA, DLCD, forestry, Business Oregon is invited. We meet with them periodically as well on these drafts to get their input ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting input from the rule, to me, that's separate. I'm just looking at it as applied. If this comes in and you're looking and you see that water is available technically, how does that review process get triggered with other agencies?
Yes, so on this sheet, you'll see that in the bottom middle, there's a big red box and red text. This part to be completed by that right section. So everything outside that box is what a groundwater section hydrogeologist would review. I would do a cursory peer review on that. It would go down to the water rights section. They would provide input on a number of our internal rule definitions. And I believe if PSI was flagged, that would initiate the Division 33 additional public interest standards in the parts of the state that have sensitive, threatened, and endangered species mapped out. So for applications in those areas with salmon-bearing streams where PSI is flagged, I believe that initiates a notification to ODFW and DEQ.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Just pausing 1 second. Any other questions?
Well, are we gonna walk do you want comments now? Do you want to walk through
I will walk through all
the
the,
stuff that we can read?
sure, yeah,
Okay.
and so
I do
basically,
have some comments, but I'm happy to wait.
yeah, one slide, I think you will get there, or two. So first of all, just reviewing that at the top part of this definition, number 57 for water is available. In previous meetings, we talked about pointing the current rules specifically to surface water. And then what we have changed since last time, you'll recall that the original rule language was water is available means it's not over appropriated. We talked about how over appropriated was, groundwater over appropriation was defined as surface water over appropriation. We changed that to overdrawn, but that still made big loops. And so, and comments from the RAC that we received were, can we be specific in this definition? And so that's what we've changed here. So we've got D, E, and F as described. And again, these are the three columns on the flow chart.
Bill, and then
Bill,
Adam.
Bill Jager, I have maybe a higher level question that might be better to address at some other point. I'm not sure I understand to what extent there's interaction between OWRD's rules and judgments about water is available and federal laws, ESA, BIOPS, and that kind of thing, where there are in-stream flow requirements. And I know there's a lot of overlap. I've been told there are 10 federal agencies that have some overlap with what is done in terms of water in the state of Oregon. Does that come into, because water available presumably should take into account the minimum flows, for example, in the Willamette River to protect fish. So again, if there's a different time or if you talked about this at the last meeting and I missed it.
Yeah, no. I would say that these rules are focused on state processes, so these don't interact with, like, on the face of them with federal ESA rules. Endangered species are addressed through this Division 33 public interest review that we just discussed. So there is some state input into that, but not federal.
All right, thank you.
Just maybe I can add a little to
Please,
that
yeah,
to
go
help
ahead.
Bill, that you have to think of these rules in two buckets. One is the connection to surface water, right, through Division 9. And then the other one is the groundwater and storage. So if you get tagged with a connection to surface water, then there are lots of reviews that go on with respect to in-stream flows.
Got it.
If that helps.
Thanks.
Yeah. I have my own comment when we're ready. Go ahead.
Oh, Susan Smith from William Bluff. I just had a I want a gold star too. I just had a comment with respect to incorporating federal law concerns into the rules in terms of availability, which is it's those processes are incredibly difficult to determine where the endpoint is. And so I guess I was really counsel against trying to say, well, under the Endangered Species Act, there's a BIOP that says, oh, by the way, that BIOP is in court. And so I think it just becomes incredibly difficult for the state to go ahead and predict what's going to happen with respect to the endangered species. So I really counsel against going ahead and incorporating that into these determinations. It is the case that it will affect things, but I think you should let those processes play themselves out.
Okay, Adam?
Okay, Adam Sussman, on behalf of COCO, actually talking about the rules. Wow. Wow. And so
Little shade.
So two comments. My first one is I appreciate the department attempting to listen to my concern about the potential unintended consequences of this new pathway of the rules on the mitigation program in the Deschutes Basin under Division 505, because those rules are very specific at the end that talk about if you provide mitigation that with respect to certain listed rules, you are essentially indemnified from this connection to surface water. And I think we're getting close, but I'm still concerned that, like Susan was saying, if you read the definition of capacity of the resource, which is in Division 400, which is in the list of indemnification, that capacity of the resource then points to another definition within it, overdrawn, I believe it is, which points you to Division 8. So you still, through this new pathway we've created, bring in a new definition and a new division of rules that are not part of that language in Division 505. And so I think we're getting close. But because we've changed the pathway of how to define waters available, you are, I believe, still in conflict with some existing rules that were specifically designed to not draw that surface water connection into them. So I continue to raise the concern that we've created a conflict. Secondly, I've had more time to think about, we have 3 criteria here, and I guess I'm still a little uncertain about, we've gone to a very kind of rudimentary, we're looking at the water level sort of concept. But then at the same time, you're looking at the capacity of the resource, which says, is the amount of appropriation greater than the amount of recharge, which if you look in the Deschutes Basin, clearly the answer to that question is no. So I guess I'm kind of confused about why we're looking at both of those things here in this definition. It's confusing to me. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, so why are we looking at those? I guess I would draw and the answer I'm about to give is perhaps not good for the overall.
Let me give you an example, Justin. If the water levels have declined more than 25 feet, but it's within the capacity of the resource. What's the answer?
Sure. So I think that it's a menu list, and that all have to be true for water to be available. And in the case of the Deschutes, where on the basin scale, recharge exceeds discharge or allocation for groundwater rights, but that recharge is not evenly applied, it's not evenly distributed. And so in areas of the basin, we see water levels declining. That is a reason for concern about whether water is available. And so that's the short answer of it, is that standard of recharge versus allocation assumes that we have data on a scale where the recharge and the allocation are relatively well matched. And we see that allocation happens in clumps around agriculturally productive land or municipalities or what have you, and recharge is also not evenly distributed, especially in the Deschutes, where it's dominantly in the Cascades and really tapers off to the east.
So I think there's 2 comments here, and I want to just acknowledge and maybe tease them out. I appreciate your answer. It is, each one of these would need to be affirmatively determined in order to meet the waters available test. We will take another look at the definition of capacity of the resource. And to your point around the connections and make sure that we haven't inadvertently pulled in something that wasn't there before.
Thank you.
The capacity of the resource, as Justin has said, that criterion is intended to be forward-looking. And so if there are changes that we need to make to that definition in order to clarify that, I think those suggestions are welcome.
But I continue to be confused because I thought one of the reasons that the department was focusing on water levels is that they didn't have information about recharge and appropriation and enough information around the state. So if you make the water level cut and you get to capacity of the resource, then the department might continue to say, I don't know. Because they have said, we say, I don't know a lot now because they don't have the information. So I just, you don't have to respond to that.
That's
Justin.
okay.
I just want you to know that it's what you're telling us and what we're doing seem to be
So what
not
we're,
consistent.
and what we're doing today is different than what we're gonna do once these rules are adopted, right? So I just also want to acknowledge that. And I would invite anybody who has suggestions or feedback on how capacity of the resource is defined to provide those so we can consider those as we iterate on the next version. Lisa.
Can I follow up to
Sure.
several of Adam's points? So I'm not water watches disputes expert, but my understanding is that those rules really are focused on the scenic waterway. So that replacing all of this with the Deschutes rules would not be compliant to the water code. So in other words, those rules that you're citing for the Deschutes are really narrowly focused, where this is taking a broader look.
I appreciate what you're saying. That's not what I'm saying, Lisa. What I'm saying is at the very end of the mitigation rules, there's a couple sentences that talk about if you provide mitigation consistent with the program, then essentially you're off the hook for any inclusion of PSI or negative effects on surface water. And it lists a number of divisions of rules that could get you there. And it doesn't include Division 8. So what I'm saying is, because we've changed the pathways for how to think about these, now we're bringing in, you can go directly to Division 8 and find that you are impairing the surface water body. And that isn't how the rules are set up in the Deschutes today. So I just believe it's an unintended consequence. I don't think anyone's doing this on purpose. I think we just need to be thoughtful about how we have existing rules and we're changing the pathway of these rules and how that's all. So I'm not suggesting.
Okay,
that-
yeah, we probably need to spend some time on that issue because, yeah, our understanding is not that those Deschutes rules would sort of get you out of this whole pathway. So to the extent that that's what you're.
Only the Division 9 portion, surface water connection portion.
Yeah, which we'll go over. That's the middle leg of this flow chart.
Okay, and then I guess the second point I would make is, all these terms, I mean, I think the reason why we have to have the 3 buckets is that it's a statutory requirement. So we can figure out how to make them work together. That's important, but I think we do have to have them all in there.
Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Bill Jager. So on this, I guess, point about, I guess, a general point about capacity of the resource, and you mentioned, and it said here that that's intended to be forward-looking. That's where I have some questions and concerns, and I just talked about some of this in my comments I emailed. That we don't know the capacity of the resource. Groundwater is so difficult to measure and understand its capacity and linkages and spatial resolution, as you mentioned. But also to be forward-looking, it seems to me it's important to take into account what we can know about future water commitments. Going back to those core guides from the commission, protecting the interests of existing water rights, sustainability. When do you or should you take account of what we know is happening with climate change, increased evapotranspiration, and what that would mean for agriculture, which dominates groundwater use in many places too.
I appreciate your comment.
Yeah.
And we are going to get to the language around how we currently have drafted the definition for capacity of the resource. So can we come back to that
Sure.
when we get there? Okay.
Okay, so that, I should pause. Anybody online? I just want to check,
I
have
don't
any
see
comments?
and nothing in the chat. I don't see any hands up either.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, so we're going to move on and down the flow chart. So next, we're going to talk about Division 8 and the changes we made there, dominantly to the definition of reasonably stable. Again, this is the left-hand column on the flow chart. And it addresses, again, the physical component of the source of water to wells of water from storage. So we updated the reasonably stable definitions, dominantly in response to some of the RAC comments, a couple on our own initiative. We have, again, from our past conversation or the RAC 3 conversation, we've added a definition of what the annual high water level is, to help with that, the questions about what that meant. We have also removed the definition for declining, because we took overdraw out of Division 300 as one of the criteria. Then that allowed us to not have to futz with that definition to make sure everything fit together. So that simplified things here as well. So we did a few other definitional changes while we were in there. Those, if you can see the little tiny blue, try and get my highlighter, my laser pointer here. So this really just addresses this bit down here. It's kind of outside of what we're doing, but I just want to draw to everybody's attention. We have made some minor edits to aquifer. We've made some minor edits to excessively declined. We've made a couple minor edits to the impair and interfere based on the past language. And we've reverted overdraw to its current language, again, with a couple minor edits that I just did our number right or typo things. So we'll go through each of those piece by piece and look at the language. Just want to point to kind of where those definitions come into play in the flow chart here, so folks can continue to hopefully follow along. So first piece was a new definition for annual high water level. So they're best to define that. We're going to assume January through April is the spring high before the irrigation season begins, but for some purposes and in some cases we've got the end. We might have to estimate that with measurements made during other parts of the year, or use measurements from other parts of the year if there's some relatively unique case. So any comments on the annual high water level definition? Oh, Sarah.
Hi, and sorry, I was just able to join, so I apologize if someone said this, but the language after the first sentence makes me kind of uneasy under the Administrative Procedures Act, because the first part is a definition, which is what you have regulations for. The second part is saying, may be assumed we can do this. And whether or not the assumptions and the other things said in the last two sentences are correct are kind of a question under the Administrative Procedures Act. So it kind of seems like you're trying to supersede what is or isn't okay as far as like substantial, substantial evidence standard and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
So it's
Yeah.
the language in here that says maybe assumed.
So I guess, Sarah, would you advocate for different language or that be part of a internal management directive as opposed to the definition?
Yeah, I would say the first sentence is a definition and the rest is all about OWRD's internal management and how it's applying the definition. So the agency certainly could have an internal memorandum if it wanted, but it doesn't seem like it's appropriate as part of the regulation itself.
Okay,
Thank you.
other comments? Bill,
Just to follow up, in the last sentence uses the word estimated, which is pretty clear what's being suggested. Could estimated replace the maybe assumed part of that sentence to make the two pieces of what sounds to me to be an indirect, a way of estimating the high water level, make both of those sentences clear that they're estimating. As
we will
opposed to
take
assuming.
another look at it. And I also want to acknowledge that Casey McClellan has a comment in the chat. And since I believe he does not have a microphone, I will read it. And his comment is, I agree, the last sentence is unsuitably vague. So this is also an opportunity for you all to provide us suggested language for us to consider on our next iteration. Oh, Casey, go ahead.
This is Casey McClellan. I think I agree with the comment. Why not just eliminate the last two sentences and that gives you the freedom to measure high water levels any time of year you want, if it's justified. I mean, I don't see how the last two sentences are really helpful.
Thank you.
All right. Paulson, for any other comments there? All right, so we're gonna move on to aquifer. So only the number has changed here for the alphabetical. I do want to acknowledge that we considered comments regarding gradual changes in water levels, chemistry, and temperature along flow paths. We tried a couple other potential definitions, but decided to keep it as it was because we thought similarly could accommodate those natural or expected phenomena. So we kept it aligned with the definition in the Division 200 rules. For declined extensively, the current definition had a number of criteria for interfering with. They mostly, I don't know, I would say in spirit, they were aligned with what we have in the definition for substantial or undue interference or impairment. So we decided just to make them the same. So basically, we replaced this restating of ABCD with a similar ABCD in substantial interference. We'll get to that here in a couple more numbered items so you can see what those mean. Okay. So let's see, typo here in declined excessively. I'll say here that we received comments suggesting these criteria be either more or less stringent, but we decided to stick with the definition as it was put forward in 1988. I will say that we went back to the rulemaking record or the staff report to the commission in 1988 about these rules and confirmed that their intention at the time was that this was a list of, again, another mix
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me online there?
Yeah. we
Okay,
can.
yeah. So I think that the issue is the internet is out with across our agencies, so statewide. So they're bringing up a hotspot so that we can get back online and rejoin. So we're just on pause right now. We're not doing anything other than waiting on that hotspot. But I didn't want to leave you guys completely in the dark about what's going on.
Yeah. Have you read?
Okay. So here's the situation, folks. We are now driving this meeting through the personal hotspot of somebody's cell phone. And Greg, I can see you, you smiled, so I'm hearing that I'm assuming you can hear me. Okay, we will monitor when the internet service comes back online here, and we may need to make a switch. I'm also just gonna say, if this doesn't work, we will figure out what plan B looks like. But we are doing our best to respond to what we understand is a statewide internet outage for state government. So that's what's happening. Can we go back to your presentation? And you're gonna have, since I don't want to hook into the hotspot as well, Justin.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to monitor when somebody has their hand up.
Okay. Do that. All right.
Okay, so you're gonna be,
Oh, wait.
so for the folks online, are you seeing Justin's screen?
That's here.
This is
Review.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you able to find back to the place? that
I
you were
just
at?
see the room right now.
Okay, hold on, we're working on it.
Sorry. Let's restart this. Okay. And let's.
Yeah, wow, that is.
Groundwater. Well, I mean, not by that.
I like this one.
Okay. All right. Are we good? Yeah. All right, let's reconvene, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Justin.
So I just want to make sure on our big screen up here, I've got just the slides. Is that what everybody online is seeing, is just the slides as well?
Correct. Yes. Mhm.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience, and we hope that this problem will be short-lived.
Yeah. All right, so I think I had just started talking about declining groundwater levels. We had, as I said at the top of this section, struck all that out. And I was just looking around for questions when we noticed we were offline. So any questions on removing this? Okay, good. I didn't expect any. I think everybody universally did not like that this was in there. So I'm glad we can accommodate. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to impairment, substantial interference, or undue interference. Again, we only made one small change to this, taking gradient and flow and turning that into groundwater levels. You know what? We were also trying to connect groundwater as one term. I won't do that on the fly, but I see now that we did that in Division 9, and that was a comment from the RAC. We'll do that in Division 8 as well. Otherwise, this is as it was presented during the last two RAC meetings. I will link this back up again to what was the definition of above? Boy, I'm getting too jumbled up, but anyway, here there's this capital A through capital E, and I had mentioned a few definitions up that we had pointed to this definition for surface water, and that's where it is. It's here. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, Justin, we were 2 slides back before we dropped the internet. And I had a comment on that particular slide, this one. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if And I'll frame it as a question. Since that definition of saturated thickness doesn't really work in all cases, that's from the water level elevation surface to the bottom of the unit or the reservoir works if that's a sedimentary aquifer and there's some uniform distribution of porosity, but in fractured rock aquifers and basalt aquifers, that's not a great definition of saturated thickness. So I understand why we're doing this. And so the question really becomes, does this warrant its own definition as in a definition section, or do you think that you're covered by defining it here, knowing that it's not really a technical definition?
I'm thinking about that. So noted, and we'll think a little bit more. One thing that I did say that might alleviate some concern about that before we cut off perhaps is that we went back and checked the record for the original staff report that proposed these declined excessively conditions and confirmed that the intent was that they listed out A through F, and that this was a menu option, and that any one of these, if any one of these was true, then that meant declined excessively. So with respect to the percent of saturated thickness, given that it exists with this greater than 50 feet below highest known level, we would likely only be applying that, or from my perspective, we would only be applying that if the total saturated thickness, or 15% of the total saturated thickness, was less than 50 feet. So it's from my perspective, that's intended for example, a relatively thin aquifer where we know that it's 25 feet thick, and then I just didn't do myself any favors on the math, but 15% of 25, is less than 50. So, we would take that. That's math I can relate to. Yeah, we would take that in those instances where the thickness was known, as opposed to large aquifers or fractured rock aquifers. But
Less than 350 feet.
there you go. Thank you. So I guess two parts to that answer, and thank you for bringing that up, and we'll continue to put some more thought into that before the next RAC. And if you've got specific suggestions for how that might be worded, we always welcome those. So written comments after the RAC, if people have time to think about it, always appreciate those as well.
Thank you.
All right, sure thing. Any other questions on declined excessively before we move on? Okay.
And Phil, you still have your hand up. Thank you.
Okay, this next slide still on impair, substantially interfere, unduly interfere. Just want to again point out that we have continued not to make any changes to B and C here. We had said from the outset, or even from commission meetings before we started up the RAC, that we weren't going to address at least this this interference question in the allocation rulemaking.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So, this does come into play though, right, in allocation, because it gets sort of used as an injury standard. And,
Yes.
as you know, because I've repeatedly made the comment, the way that this gets applied to say that somebody has to drill to the bottom of the aquifer before there's interference is really inconsistent with reasonably stable groundwater levels and capacity of the resource, right? If you're saying there's no interference unless if you're basically forcing somebody to drill to the bottom of the aquifer, you're acting in a way that's at odds with the rest of the rules. So I just will continue to make that point. I think this needs to be changed. I mean, to say that somebody's reasonably sort of accessing an aquifer in an efficient way, I think is different than how this at least gets applied, which is, you know, drilled on the bottom.
Sure, I'll say one thing which is reasonably stable, the way that we've defined it is based on spring high water levels. And from my perspective, this clause and interference is really summer pumping lows, seasonal lows, as opposed to spring highs. So I'll just make that clarification. I've heard your comment and yeah, noted. And but I do want to make that clear that the way that we've defined reasonably stable is where is it in the spring before pumping occurs? And again, this I see is applying to in late summer, fall, once pumping has like reached its maximum amount of interference seasonally. So
Yeah, I still think it's, you know.
Yeah, and so we appreciate the comment. And I think what, I'm just gonna restate what Justin said, you know, in discussion with the commission about the scope of this rulemaking, our acting director said this was not an issue that we would address through this rulemaking. So that'll be something that we'll need to evaluate in the future.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I listened to that as well. I'm not sure that sort of how this rule fits in with the rest of the groundwater rules was sort of fully vetted in that moment. So I was just glad that we continue to think it should be addressed.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, or sorry, I should pause there real quick to see if anybody else has any comments before we move off impairment and substantial or undue interference. Great.
Yeah, I guess with regard to this, you know, this rule requiring that, you know, everybody sort of, you know, like the race to the bottom of the aquifer rule, if I'm understanding this correctly, when we're talking about these basalt aquifers, this tends to result in situations where, you know, unless the department can really define where the bottom of an aquifer is, this has resulted in, you know, deepening of wells or drilling of wells into successively deeper aquifers that are, you know, should be considered as separate basalt aquifers. But the end result is that you end up getting all of these aquifers ended up commingling together, and it's sort of created over the years, you know, this problem where we have this, you know, successive development of deeper and deeper basalt aquifers, wells that are constructed to, you know, they're open to every single one of them, and you've created this commingling issue. So I mean, this is just something I think that is worth mentioning. I don't know how it sort of plays in with the, you know, this rulemaking process, but I think it's a comment that's worth at least making at this point.
All right, yeah, thanks, Greg. Noted, and we'll continue to think about that. And again, when we address this, it'll be during a different rulemaking, so we'll keep that cognizant for the future. Okay. All right, so overdraw definition, again, we've reverted this back to its original 1988 definition with minor edits. We had made some changes to this, and instead of showing you the changes and the strikeouts, because we've reverted back to what it is, we've shown you kind of what it is today in black text with our proposed changes in red, and that's simply this or statement here, and noting that overdrawing is also used in statute, so we put it in here to be explicit.
Lisa.
I actually had a comment on the impairment. Did we skip that?
We didn't skip it, but go ahead.
So, I'm struggling a little bit with this definition of depletion of the surface water source that, and then it's already over appropriated, blah, blah, blah. You get down to E, and it says, you know, has an in-stream flow that is. But are we really concerned about also pumping that would result in an in-stream water right or any senior irrigation right or any senior water right not being met? In other words, the way that this is defined, it seems to say we're only concerned with depletion of a surface water source if these conditions already exist.
Yes. So
And don't we really want to say that in E, something like that is unmet or would become unmet during any period of the year as a result? And I know it tracks back to like 5C above, but as I track it back, it seems to sort of not catch the situation where we don't have a senior right that's already unmet, but we could cause a senior water right to become unmet, whether that's an in-stream right or an irrigation right or that.
okay, so I think that functionally what would happen with this is this is again tied most significantly to Division 9. And if there's the potential for substantial interference, actual substantial interference is if the surface water source is already in one of these categories. So we would look to the water availability reporting system. And if it said water's not available in any period of the year, so right now WARS is monthly, so if any month says water's not available, then we would say, okay, that means PSI means substantial interference. In the case where water was available 12 months out of the year, but it was just available by some tiny fraction, and if the groundwater application rate averaged over 12 months was gonna exceed that, I'll need to ask Ryan, probably Stringfellow or other experts, exactly how that process would go. You know, would we over appropriate it by one right, or would we say, no, that would cause over appropriation and there's only water available for this amount, and therefore we'd go back to the applicant and maybe give them exactly that amount? I'm not sure, but that's the situation in which I think that would be, in which your hypothetical would be operational. So ultimately I need to get back to you on that, but
Okay.
that's how my understanding of how we would do that.
Okay, I just want to make sure we have some system to catch those.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Great.
Just a quick follow-up and.
Sorry,
Somebody
we'll
had
go to
their hand
Greg,
up.
we'll go to
Right.
Greg first and
And
then.
then,
You're pointing at your computer, I think you're pointing straight at me.
No, sorry, Greg and then Zach.
Sorry, Greg.
Okay, I may be repeating myself here, but I guess, well, actually, I want to make a couple of comments and then I have one question. So little a, big A is already over appropriated during any period of the year. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I really think that makes up almost all of the surface water sources in the state. I mean, there's a few, okay, there's the Willamette River, there may be a few others, but for the most part, all the streams, if you look at WARS anyway, they're already over appropriated at some time of the year, typically, the summer months. Also, if you're looking at little a, big D, sources that have been regulated off due to insufficient supply, that's a shorter list, it's a shorter list, but still it's an awful lot of surface water rights or surface water sources that have been at one time or another regulated off. So just those two things right there are going to result in my opinion anyway, vast majority of new permits applying for groundwater that's hydraulically connected to surface water, they will be denied. Those are my two comments. The question that I have is, when you say is already over appropriate during any period of the year, now does that mean that if somebody wanted to apply for an off-season water right, that, you know, would, so during a period of time when water was available in the stream, but water was maybe not available during the summer months when they weren't applying for the water right, would that mean that that would result in a denial?
Oh, you muted during the middle of your comment, Greg.
No, he's talking.
But his, he was muted.
Okay, so what part of that what was the last thing you heard me say?
So I think what we heard you say is you were asking a question about whether an off-season application, how that would be affected under this, how that would be viewed under this rule language.
Yes, under the circumstances where surface water was available during the off-season period, but not available, say, during, you know, August, September, and October, or something like that.
Right. Okay, so first of all, if somebody wanted to appropriate groundwater for storage for an AR, ASR project, first of all, we'd look at the 50% exceedance, not the 80. So I'll just make that clear. If the 50% exceedance isn't available in August, right now, well, I guess it would depend on if it were a limited license or a permanent permit. So that's one question and how that might work.
Well,
But-
let's just go off the
Yeah.
rule language. So
Sure.
right
So-
now, the rule language would indicate that there is not water
that there's
available.
not water available, correct?
And so I think implied in your question is a potential comment, which is that you would like us to consider whether to draft rules that would allow for that.
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
Can I respond to that?
go ahead, Lisa.
I mean, isn't part of the issue though, that the influence of the groundwater pumping is not felt immediately? So you could pump groundwater during the winter when there was water available for wars, but that impact of the groundwater pumping could be affecting the stream at a time, or senior water rights holders at a time when there's not water available. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying, if there's water available in wars in a particular month, then it's safe to pump more groundwater.
You're correct, and it probably also depends on your location, right? So something that we will think more about. Any other comments on this one? Zach.
Yeah, thanks. Zach Freed, Nature Conservancy. I would just say that, first off, I would strongly urge caution about considering, I like the rule as stated right now, where if the water is already over appropriated during any period of the year, then its UE could be triggered. Because of the chronic impacts that Lisa alluded to. We have seen that story written across the entire state with chronic impacts to groundwater, interannual impacts that are not on a monthly scale. We're not talking about acute monthly impacts. So I would strongly support maintaining the current text and urging caution about when we can allocate groundwater rights because of the impacts that over allocation can have to economic uses, human health, and ecological needs. So just putting that out there. And then secondly, I was thinking more about the comment that Lisa had about D and E, or really she had it about E, which is
has a minimum perennial stream flow or in-stream water right that is unmet during any period of the year. You might consider adding, that is unmet during any period of the year or would be unmet if the water were allocated. Which might prevent that edge case where water is available during 12 months of the year, but only a little bit is available, and allocating this new right would cause impact, would substantially interfere with the minimum perennial stream flow or in-stream water right.
Thank you.
Okay.
And so it is 10 o'clock. We were gonna have a break, but in light of the technical difficulties, I'd maybe propose that we carry on. And if you need a break, just take care of it. Does that work for folks? Okay.
All right. I think we were here and I was just asking if anybody had any comments on reverting overdraw before I go on. Okay. All right, and that brings us to reasonably stable groundwater levels.
I do have a comment. Susan Smith. I noticed that adopted shows back up in overdrawn and taken adopted out with respect to impairments and E. So I wondered if you did want to keep adopted in there.
Sorry. Thank you for catching that, Susan. We'll take a look and see.
It's in small b, big B for those wanting to follow along.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah, we'll move on to reasonably stable. Okay, so we have made a number of revisions here. I want to note that on the slide that we're looking at, we have removed a bunch of the strikeout language to keep it readable. So that strikeout language is in your handouts and you will see what we took out, but for putting it up on the screen, we left it. Again, this was a new definition, so all the text is red. The yellow is new text, but the yellow highlighted is new text as of our last two RACs based on input and discussion during our last two RAC meetings and submitted comments. So just walking through that briefly, we talked about the annual high water levels measured at one or more representative wells in a groundwater reservoir or part thereof. We talked about how reasonably stable indicated, either no decline or an average rate of decline of less than half a foot a year. We took out a lot of words and replaced them with duration to try and make it more specific. So we need between 5 and 20 years of data is what we're looking at for this assessment of the decline of no more than half a foot a year over some period of time between 5 and 20 years. And if we don't have the data to perform this test, we're going to presume that water levels are not reasonably stable. So this is addressing previous conversations with the commission about making a positive finding that water is available, and that if we don't have information that we know what checkbox we're going to mark, and removing this cannot be determined. So it's either yes or no, and this helps us make a specific yes or no finding. Then we also talked about, okay, we have this rate definition, half a foot a year or less, and then we have, if if we have this kind of long, slow decline and it's chronic, it's not some cyclical climate pattern, then we're going to say at the smaller of either 25 feet total decline or 8% of greatest known saturated thickness. So that's roughly half of the excessively declined. If we're halfway to that definition, then we're going to call that not reasonably stable, and therefore water's not available for additional appropriation.
Question.
Check. So with that, Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. So you mentioned being able to check one of the boxes, yes or no, and getting rid of the box on the groundwater review form that says, not enough information, we don't know. My question is, what is the agency doing to be able to have the information to decisively answer the yes or no, rather than just kind of saying, well, we don't know, therefore no, but there's no checkbox, but we don't know. I mean, it seems like under the current rules, everything would be improved if we had the data to know. And so I'm just curious, I know there's HB 2018, but what is the agency doing to be able to gather the data necessary? Thanks. If someone's talking, I can't hear anything that's being said.
I'm sorry, Sarah. How about now? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So a couple things. So yes, you're right. So House Bill 2018 was a bill in the 21 session that added funds for us to convert existing wells to observation wells or drill new observation wells, and that work continues. Also, the clause we put up at the top here in 10A, measured at one or more representative wells, is intended to give us leeway to look around at all available water level information. And then I guess lastly, if we truly, if we don't have representative water levels, then what we've heard from the commission is, hey, you need to make a positive finding water is available. So if we don't have that information, this definition sets us up such that the applicant knows exactly how long they need to collect this information for. So we're saying that we need at least 5 years of data to determine a trend, and to give us some level of confidence that that trend is that cyclical, is it changing, what have you. That's the balance we've struck with this 5 years. Could be 4, could be 6. It's not a real magical number, but at least the applicant knows, hey, if we don't have data, then they can collect data, for a period of 5 years. Or if they have data that is more than 20 years old, they can take, a data point to compare it back, and we can do that as well. So yes, we are trying to collect data in places where we know we have gaps, and this also gives the criteria for what an applicant would need to do to fill that record with data.
So just as a follow-up, the regulations to me aren't at all clear about what an applicant can do to provide data. So I don't know if there's an additional rule that you're planning on making or what that says what an applicant should be doing in the absence of available data, but it's been very unclear in the past what the Water Resources Department will or won't accept as far as data. And so if there is a way to say, we're putting this responsibility on applicants, therefore you need to do X, Y, and Z, that would at least provide transparency and let people know what you're proposing and what would be required.
Thanks for that input, and noted, and we'll consider that.
Adam,
Well, Adam Sussman, GSI on behalf of COCO. Probably gonna repeat myself a little bit here, but for those of you who haven't heard this, first of all, I don't think that the rules make sense for the Deschutes Basin. I think the point of this rulemaking is to try to find rules that can be used statewide. So in the Deschutes Basin, we actually do have lots of information. And some of the information we have is that irrigation districts in the 50s and 60s were diverting over 900,000 acre feet into leaky canals. And about 50% of that water was recharging the aquifer. So we had elevated water levels. So when we start talking about the highest known water level, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Is it the highest known natural water level or what? But the other point that I want to make in terms of the confusion about how you would determine that water level is that these numbers in this rule don't make sense for the Deschutes Basin because we have an aquifer that is 1,000 foot thick and we have drilled to the bottom of it. We know where the bottom of it is. We have data in a USGS peer-reviewed study that shows where the bottom is and what the thickness of the aquifer is. We also know that in the Redmond area, that water levels have already declined more than 25 feet. In fact, they've declined 38 feet. Okay, well, 38 feet is less than 4% of the saturated thickness of the aquifer. And so what I want to understand from the department is essentially what we're saying is we're closing the Deschutes Basin for any further groundwater appropriation, and we're preserving 96% of the saturated thickness of the aquifer. Is that what we're doing here? Because I want someone to go out to the Deschutes Basin and tell folks that's what we're doing. As an alternative, and to develop a rule that makes sense statewide, I have suggested over and over again that you have, maybe if you want to have your A and B with an and in between it, because you don't have better information and you're just going to simply use groundwater levels as a proxy. But where you have information, maybe perhaps you should have an or. If the saturated thickness of the aquifer is something like 500 or 700 feet thick, and that can be known or ascertained, that then you're talking about a percentage of the aquifer at that point, 10%, 15%. Because the department, through the statute, is required to maintain reasonably stable water levels and to think about the capacity of the resource, but they're also required to think about the maximum economic development of the groundwater resource. You don't have just one or two obligations in their statute, you have multiple obligations. And the extent and the capacity of the resource for an aquifer of that thickness, it makes sense, instead of using an arbitrary decline number, which I'm not even sure how you do that given the human impact on the groundwater levels in the Deschutes from both artificial recharge and now piping. You think more broadly and in a rule that would make sense for the Deschutes Basin.
Thank you for that comment. And I think some of what you mentioned is create some nuance that I'm not sure we've thought about. I think the one thing we have thought about is that the commission's, a comment I will make that we are thinking about is that the commission's direction to us is to be more sustainable. And so in terms of the definitions that we have now for excessively declined, we've got 50 feet or 15%, either one of those. So in the Deschutes Basin, excessively declined would be 50 feet. And so we want to make sure that with this, we are being more sustainable than how excessively declined is defined. And we're not proposing to change that definition. So I think that's part of why you're seeing what you're seeing here. I know that staff evaluated water level information in the Deschutes Basin to ensure that these levels would not be so conservative to, that they reflect the decadal climate cycle, which is why it's not smaller than 25 feet, I think, Lisa, to your comment. And so those are the things that we have considered in coming up with what you see in front of you now.
I appreciate what you're saying. I think earlier Justin noted that those definitions in Division 8 about excessively declined were established in 1988.
Yep.
And they were based on concerns in the Umatilla Basin. And we were talking about a completely different and much thinner aquifer framework there. And so to be stuck in the past from a definition developed in 1988 and argue to me that that makes sense to apply in the Deschutes, I think is not a good argument. And I think if we're gonna modernize the department's rules, then let's modernize them and let's do things that make sense.
Yep, I understand that. The other comment I would make is the other consideration that we are keenly aware of is that we want to avoid, and I saw this in some of the comments as well, we want to avoid issuing a groundwater right to someone who then makes a number of investments that then subsequently it needs to be curtailed as a result of a critical groundwater area designation. So that is the other consideration that we're thinking of. And so I appreciate your comments, Adam, and I think that's something that we can talk more about.
And again, I want to understand if it's the department's position to stop all groundwater appropriation in the Deschutes and save 96% of the saturated thickness of the aquifer. I think that's, you know, we've got cities that are growing, we've got pending applications from municipal water providers. We've got a lot of economic development going on.
And we also have surface water level issues in the Deschutes.
Well,
So
and that's
this
my
is-
last-
and it is very hydraulically connected.
That's my last point that I want to make sure that everyone understands is that this rulemaking is about modernizing how we think about the connection of surface water with Division 9, right? And then B, how we think about the groundwater level in storage.
Right.
Okay. For the Deschutes Basin, which will probably be the only basin that gets past Division 9.
Yep.
Because we have a mitigation program.
Not
That
the only,
is-
but
That is not what we're talking about here. We already have a mitigation program that indemnifies and kind of separates the conversation about surface water impacts. If we want to have a conversation about how to improve the mitigation rules, I'm all about having that in a different forum. But what we're talking about in this definition, it has nothing to do with connection to surface water. This is all about the groundwater in storage and the sustainability of that. And so I don't want to confuse those two things, because in the Deschutes, that's a very different conversation.
we agree with you there. Greg has his hand up.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I just think we need to be very careful in developing and adopting these rules that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot and create a situation where we now have hamstrung our ability to do ASR project, because whatever, aquifer recharge, managed aquifer recharge, MAR. Yeah, because I mean, essentially with these rules, we're fundamentally changing water law in Oregon. And, we're going for, these are sweeping changes, going from, perhaps, allocating too much groundwater in some areas to now allocating very little groundwater. And so we're, in order to be able to achieve, continued economic development of groundwater, and make it sustainable, we need to be able to do these AR projects. And I just, we just have to be very careful not to, end up with a set of rules that are gonna make it impossible or more difficult to do those kinds of projects. Because that's I think the future for us moving ahead, to be able to do, to sustainably manage our whole water system throughout the state. And I also just, I guess, want to make the comment that, all this discussion about reasonably stable groundwater levels is really only applies, in the very few circumstances where we're going to be evaluating applications proposing to use groundwater that's not hydraulically connected to surface water, because the way the definitions are, it's not even going to come into play if we've got hydraulic connection. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Zach.
Yeah, I would just, Zach Freed, Nature Conservancy, I would just reiterate the point that I've made before, which is that I really don't think we want to distinguish between sources of recharge and why a high water level in a representative well is a high water level, whether that's due to canal leakage or changes in climate. Regardless if recharge is changing, and regardless if the withdrawal of groundwater in that aquifer is changing to create a decline in groundwater levels, it doesn't matter if that water was coming from a leaky canal that is now lined. That means that there's an imbalance in those water levels, right? If the water levels are declining, that means we are pulling water from storage there. So I just want to reiterate that I don't think to me, it doesn't seem to matter where the recharge is coming from, whether it's from canal lining or irrigation efficiency projects or whatever. It just matters what the water levels themselves are and what that trend looks like, especially from an ecosystem perspective. Allison Aldis and Leslie Bach in 2014 found that very small changes in depth to groundwater can have substantial impacts to ecological flows in groundwater dependent rivers and streams and in springs. And Deb Perone in 2019 found that deepening groundwater levels in wells adjacent to streams across the United States, this was a nationwide analysis, caused impacts to streams and rivers. So I just want us to be clear that, like, yes, 25 feet feels arbitrary, but ecological impacts can be felt well before 25 feet is reached, regardless of the total depth or saturated thickness of the aquifer. So from the standpoint of just considering ecosystem impacts, you can see those from 5 feet of declines.
May I ask a question of my good friend Zach? I'm just trying to have limited intellect. So Jeff Stone Nurseries. So I was working with Leslie Bach a long time ago when we were talking about winter flows and whether or not you could store some of that water. And so I'm just trying to figure out how all those things interconnect. So let's say that that did come to fruition and we were able to actually achieve injection into groundwater or other sources from the winter flows that, would protect the juveniles, all that kind of stuff. It was the extra water, right? Mm-hmm. So is that what you're talking about too, that regardless of that dynamic, I mean, how we judge what the high water level would be? I don't know if those are separate, and maybe this is something that we can talk about offline, but I mean, that was certainly the intent of that effort, was to try to make sure that there was not an ecologically damaging act.
Yeah, sure, Jeff. I'd be happy to talk with you more about that afterwards. I think those are two distinct topics.
That was a very kind way of saying it. Thank you for your gentleness.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I think we've heard from Adam about concerns around this definition and how it impacts the disputes. Were there other comments that we received in writing, Justin, that you wanted to discuss as part of this definition? I think I've already tried to address Lisa's comment that 25 is too much, or why 25?
Yeah, sorry, I'm flipping slides here just to look at my notes. Two key things.
Any other comments? Lisa, go ahead, and then, Bill.
Yeah, just Lisa Brown, Water Watch, sorry to do that before. You know, we also have to consider domestic wells. I mean, if you want to talk about economics and whether people can live on their property, and, you know, this is really important in that context, setting up reasonable decline depth, as well as for the ecological reasons that Zach mentioned. And to Greg's comment, you know, about that this would only come into play where you weren't triggering a hydraulic connection. I mean, the Harney Basin, of course, is like exhibit A on that, right? It's been over allocated by 110,000 acre feet, and people are losing their domestic wells, they're losing their irrigation wells, got ecological, you know, issues. So, you know, this is just, it's absolutely important to get this right and keep it tight to avoid creating, you know, serious problems like that. So that's it.
Bill, and then we'll come back to you, Adam. Okay, so we'll get Lauren, and then we'll come back to you, Adam. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure, Bill Jager. So two things. One, I think the last meeting that I attended, I raised a question about the possibility of having a more statistically an approach to the measurement of decline that could have some statistical confidence intervals around it to base, you know, on a certain amount of time series data. Thinking, I guess I'm thinking along the lines of what would make this something that would withstand peer review, and in addition to variability and the trend and confidence intervals around that, I'm wondering about how one determines what is a representative well in the first part of this. I mean, in economic research, trying to have a comparator that's a representative household or farm or business, it's a difficult thing. And so that seems to be, I guess there are a couple of things that are ambiguous up here. I'd just like to get your explanation or comment on that. How one judges what, you know, a representative well, how do you determine it's representative, or if it's maybe not so representative, then you need one or more. How many do you need if you're not sure that any of them are representative? And then if data are insufficient, how do you determine whether it's insufficient or not?
Yeah, so I guess I would point, I want to link this perhaps with Sarah Lillyfeld's earlier comment on what are we doing to ensure we've got sufficient data, because the answer to your question is really, it depends, and functionally we are relying on the professional judgment of our hydrogeologists that are reviewing the application to take a look at all available data, what we know about the conceptual model of the groundwater system, as well as where we have individual water level records of various durations, and to make that assessment. We've considered, should there be criteria? Like, I acknowledge that there's terms in here that are not like numerically defined. And I think that's most appropriate for a statewide rule that we have to apply some judgment to. Also, I'll reiterate comments from a previous discussion the RAC has had, where, you know, we want to look at all available data. We receive information from applicants and their agents routinely, and we take all that into account. So we try and get the biggest bundle of data we can to look at. So that's my responses. Yeah, acknowledge that we don't have a numeric value, and again, for a statewide rule, I think the best thing to do is rely on assessments by our hydrogeologists with input from the applicant, their agents, any concerned parties. And I'll say that once we do that, we also, like, when you say what wells are representative, what wells are not, like, once we identify one, we, you know, our best practices, you know, that continues to be a representative well, right? Like, we aren't flip-flopping on its representative in this applicant's case and not the other. So we'll continue to look back at past reviews and bring that knowledge forward as well in similar areas.
And there's some judgment about the distance, if you're concerning an applicant for this space, representative also has to be nearby.
Yeah.
In some hydrologic sense.
That's right, and it has to depend on the hydrologic or hydrogeologic understanding.
Lauren and then Adam.
I'm sorry, and I might be a bit confused on whether or not this was fully answered, but how would these definitions interplay with the desire to use aquifers for storage? I mean, if we're artificially increasing the water level, how would that play with this definition if you then later want to recover it? Or if, say, you're not immediately recovering it within a short amount of time, but you leave it there for a while, does that then inflate the water level to a point that then no one can appropriate in the future? I guess this is where I'm getting lost on, especially that with the movement. We don't want to get in the position where we're discouraging people from looking at those projects because we have definitions that would make it difficult to then either retrieve the water or for other people to appropriate groundwater at its prior groundwater levels.
Yeah, so Lauren, I don't know that this would, so that the aquifer storage and recovery and the artificial recharge rules sit outside of the allocation rules. And even today, we have folks that have developed ASR projects within critical groundwater areas where it's been closed for decades. And if they are able to appropriate wintertime water when flows are available and get it to the right water quality and get it in the ground, they recover that based on a bank account analogy, I guess, for lack of a better term off the top of my head, for pulling that back out the next season when they have a need for it. And there are rules as to how that bank account persists through time as well. So, and I should say, I'll also link that back to the very first definition of annual static high. And one of the conversations we had when developing that definition, which had those more qualitative terms in the last two sentences, was, well, what do we do if we're in an area near an ASR program where the annual high is at the end of artificial injection, and that might not be within that, you know, traditional spring high period. And that was one of the things that we intended for that language to cover, but we'll keep that in mind when we revisit that language as well.
Okay, Adam and then Susan.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond a little bit about the domestic exempt use wells, because Adam Sussman on behalf of COCO, because I want to make sure that people understand, like in Central Oregon for COCO, I mean, for someone's well to go dry, that's a really terrible thing, and it could be really expensive to fix. But I also want people to understand that in the Deschutes, as an example, in the regional aquifer, there's a lot of domestic wells that were drilled, say in the 80s, when water levels were a lot higher for a lot of reasons that Zach would like to ignore. And what happened was drillers would drill into the aquifer one stick of casing, like, aha, we're in water, and they put one stick in of casing because that was the cheap way to go. And because of lots of reasons, the water levels have declined and those wells are running out of water. And so I think as a matter of policy, and in fact, there's even case law, and there's actually I believe it's a 2020 legal memorandum from the department's attorney talking about the state's obligation under ORS 537-525 to essentially not hold the rest of the aquifer hostage because someone decided to save money and just drill into the aquifer a little bit. So terrible situation. I think we need to find resources for folks that are experiencing that, but we need to understand why it happened and how that relates to management going forward.
Susan?
Yeah, Susan Smith, Willamette Law. It seems like to me that notwithstanding other regulations with respect to managed aquifer recharge, that these, the water availability question will be decided against places where there has been storage of water through recharge, and then there's withdrawal of that. So to me, that says what we need is a high level exemption / reference to the regulations that govern those projects, and basically take those waters out of this equation. And I'll have to think about language, but I think this squarely affects those recharge projects. And we're gonna have something that makes it clear that no, we don't want this triggered if somebody is withdrawing their recharge water.
Any other comments?
Okay.
Not seeing any hands up either. So thank you for that comment. Bill?
So Susan, so you're talking about a case where someone's actions has, in a sense, has intentionally raised the groundwater, and so that separate activity should not be sort of put under these rules and have them not be able to take their water that they banked.
Yeah.
They banked some
Their
water.
banked water.
So that was intentional. Adam, what you described with the history of unlined canals seems to be maybe something that's similarly but unintentional, having raised the groundwater level as a side effect of lots of canals that weren't lined, but maybe now are. And so there's essentially there's been I'm just wondering out loud a little bit if that's in some way an unintentional raising of the groundwater relative to, I know this gets sticky when you start thinking, well, what is the natural groundwater level?
And I think we're better off avoiding that question, because the results of mining projects and other conservation measures on a basin-wide basis is just too variable. You know, if you look at the studies around the world as to whether or not there's water conservation efforts actually conserve water or not, it's really hard to tell. And so I guess my sense would be stay out of that morass. On the other hand, we want to positively encourage these recharge projects. And so let's go ahead and make sure that those things can be done without triggering this.
Susan, I would just have to respectfully disagree that, we know that this has happened to increase the water levels. We know that. And we know that water levels are declining because the groundwater is working to find kind of a new equilibrium as less irrigation water is being diverted, the canals are being lined, efficiency of irrigation is improving, all good things are happening. But to just kind of kick that to the side and say, wow, these water levels have really declined a lot, so we should stop groundwater appropriation. To me, if the department wants to do anything that's even remotely science-based, I don't know how we ignore those kind of facts. And in a place in the Deschutes Basin where they're specifically documented in a USGS peer reviewed study. I just don't know how we kick that to the curb and decide that they're not relevant. So I don't have a good answer. It's hard for me to understand how we would do that.
Okay, appreciate the discussion. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. So Jeff, I heard your comment. I think just to recap, I think what we're hearing is Adam's comments that these criteria don't work for the Deschutes Basin for a number of reasons. I think, and then concerns about how does this play in with managed aquifer recharge and aquifer storage and recovery? So we will look at both of those. I think the overall objective is that the groundwater resource is managed for long-term sustainability. So if we want to talk about the policy question, it is, do we allocate groundwater that exceeds what we can expect in the long term, the level to remain stable, right? So and so I think that's really, from a policy question, what we're going to have to wrestle with. Because the room is cutting out. Do we know if our internet is bad? I'm checking.
The indication that it is, yeah.
I've asked OWRD who are logged in to log off. It looks like they jumped off. Okay. Sarah, will you please let us know if that gets better? And Greg, I see that you have your hand up.
Just to let you know if it's better, I mean, I can hear you now. You're cutting in and out, so I didn't hear the last part of your response comment, for example. But you're here now.
Okay. Greg.
Yeah, I think I was having some technical difficulties here on my end, and I was managed to get back in. I was out for a little bit, but it doesn't look like we went very far, but I just kind of would ask if Annette, you could kind of repeat that last, what you were talking about, sort of the policy question. Sounds like something that maybe I need to hear.
So I think the policy question is, how much decline does the department allow in order, if our goal is to manage the resource sustainably for the long term, how much decline is allowed in order to support economic development and other uses when we know that decline is not going to be made up? I think that's the question.
Yeah, okay.
You're betting on it needing, you're betting on that it's going to be made up or recharged at some point in the future. Otherwise, if you allow for a decline, eventually it's going to be all gone, right? I mean, that's the question.
So I'll just add to that, there's a timing component. And
right.
When we're talking about impacts, I would urge everybody to be thinking about timing of impacts and what their input is on the appropriate time scale at which we assess it best.
Right.
Okay,
It's kind of my Freebird, Jeff Stone. So time and, how far out do we go and then how much at any one time, right? Those are the two kind of axes that I have pined on. So that's the clearest I've heard it say, and I'm not surprised that Justin gave it to you.
So do you have an opinion?
No, it's my Freebird. I mean, that's a central point of the things as we pull this all together and look at everything in its entirety. That continues to be something that I'm watching personally as a member of this RAC, how that plays out.
Right. Okay, Tammy?
Yeah, Tammy Wood, Oregon Lakes, and I just have felt at many points along in this process that one of the things that we're dealing with here is a real fundamental mismatch between certain timescales. So essentially, we are talking about, allocating these groundwater rights essentially in perpetuity. And yet, we have this very limited time frame on which to assess whether water is available. So it only makes sense to me, given that fundamental mismatch, that you should be looking forward in time as long as, as far as you can reasonably do so, to cover yourself for that fundamental mismatch that's embedded in our water law.
Yeah, so this 25-foot number was really intended to represent a decline that is beyond the decadal climate cycle. Right. Did you have your hand up, Greg?
Yeah, I do. I just have some, I guess, a couple of general comments. And I mean, these policy questions are very difficult, I think. And, I think we all want to find the right balance between, sustainable use of all of our water resources, to be protective of the environment and ecological, important ecological factors and economic development and all this. And I guess, where we find that balance in a lot of ways, I think depends kind of on a philosophy and sometimes, I think, when you look at the individuals, it comes down to value judgments. And I think, that's what makes it real difficult, I think. And so with the department, I think needs to follow a policy, though, that really does seek to balance all of these concerns. And my concern is that we're heading in a direction where we're going away from that balance. And, I think this process is moving too fast. I think we could do a better job of finding that balance, but in my opinion, I think we need to step back and we need to really take a closer look at all of these questions and consider other options. And I don't think that this process is allowing us to do that. So I'm not going to say any more, because I could go on and on and on. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out. Thanks.
And so I appreciate that comment, Greg, and it would be helpful if you could maybe follow up with us in terms of your suggestions or ideas on options that you would like us to consider. Lisa.
Yeah, just to follow that up, I think, and maybe you were trying to get, sorry, Lisa Brown, Water Watch. The reality is we've had rules in place for a long time that really were science-based. I mean, the groundwater pumping, for example, is only being evaluated out to 1 year, which we know now, which we realized was basically injuring senior water rights. It was not consistent with the prior appropriation doctrine. We've known since at least 2014 that there's a huge problem in the Harney Basin. So I feel like I think we're going at an appropriate pace. I think if anything, I wish this would have happened, 10, 20 years ago. But the reality is now across the state, groundwater has been over appropriated in a lot of places. And so I think being, extra cautious in recognition that these are water rights that exist in perpetuity is really the right thing to do. I mean, we have to kind of look at how we got here to sort of evaluate what's the appropriate steps to take. So I think it's timely and it's appropriate.
Susan, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Susan Smith, Willamette Law. I would come back to some of Lisa's earlier comments, which is that although people are saying we have to do this balance of economic development and allow new groundwater permits to be let in various places. The fact of the matter is, we know that there's damage in terms of the ecological flows, and I guess more personally or more corporately, we know that there's damage to existing senior users. And those people have made investments that will be lost. The value of them will be lost if you go ahead and continue to allow the groundwater to be depleted. And let me just use an example I'm familiar with. Willamette invested $800,000 in the Zeno Forest out in Polk County. Our groundwater well, which is essential to our operations, bringing the students out there, has gone dry. And because of the amount of groundwater that's being consumed by the agricultural vineyards that are around us. That's an investment that we stand to lose if we can't use the land. And so it's almost balancing existing economic investments and their value against the value of new development. So let's not see it all as we're cutting off economic development if we sacrifice those existing investments.
Thank you. I appreciate this discussion. We do have 20 more slides for today, but again, I don't want to cut off this discussion because I actually think this is the heart of the issue. So, Bill.
Yeah, Bill Jager. Yeah, just to reinforce some of the things that have just been said. This is a priority, and I this is reiterating things that I sent in an email. This is a prior appropriation system, so the priority and the seniority are key. And so protecting those water rights, many of which are over 100 years old, and potentially the Oregon Water Resources Department will be in charge of protecting those rights for 100 years in the future. That is, it seems to me that it should underlie where the what is at stake and what is fundamental to the mandate of this agency is to protect the value of those rights. And going into the future, it's not that far into the future that rising temperatures and increasing evapotranspiration and all the agricultural uses, a state of Oregon study has estimated 10 or 20% increases in evapotranspiration for agricultural commodities over the next 2 or 3 decades. And so if that means in the Harney Basin and in other basins that those irrigators are going to be increasing their applied water per acre to continue to put their water rights to beneficial use without waste, it seems to me this agency needs to be thinking about how are they going to make sure that that additional 10 or 20% of water is protected for those very senior water rights that have been around for decades. And that seems to me, given what I understand about the law and climate and hydrology, to be something that should carry a lot more weight than what potential additional economic development may arise. We all want a healthy economy. We want a sustainable economy, but protecting those people, those interests who have these water rights that are senior, to me, the picture is pretty clear that emphasis has to be top priority.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I am not seeing any other comments in the chat. So I appreciate this discussion.
All right, again, just clarification here, this maybe gets a bit at, again, Sarah Liliefeld's comment about what the criteria are, not that we say that the applicant has to provide this, but this is kind of persistence data, how we if our data isn't recent today, we'll look back as far as 5 years. And then this last clause remains as it was originally. Well, we've taken out some words, but basically we're saying that we're looking at this definition can be superseded, but as written now, that definition can't be less stringent than the current def. Okay. So with that, we'll go out with a very minor change. We've actually, I failed to mention in earlier slides, we've made this change or attempted to make it throughout for consistency. There was some discussion amongst the RAC of surface water body versus surface water source. We stuck with source or went with source because that was the most commonly used. Kind of historically, that was the term that's used, and it's the most commonly used in a bunch of other definitions too. So we thought that was most consistent use of terminology. So with that, right, move on to division 9. Is
there anybody online that's got any questions?
All right, let's move on. So division 9, coming back to this spreadsheet, if you remember the spreadsheet, we're now into the middle column here with respect to groundwater interference with surface water. We made relatively minor comments in with respect to changes from our discussion at the last RAC number 3. We have removed substantial evidence from the rule language, as was discussed and commented on by a number of folks. And also we did some groundwater 2 words to groundwater 1 word changes, but otherwise we left the rules language the same as previously presented. And so for today, here's just a quick groundwater change up in the definitions, and then some strike through where we took the substantial evidence piece out, and instead of replacing it with something, we decided that it read fine just to take that out and let it go. So go ahead.
Susan Smith, Willamette Law. As I look at your chart, this is a potential for substantial interference is a major way to get to water availability. So if you find there's no potential for substantial interference, then you have available water, which is fine. But I guess my question is, isn't everything in the box really decided on that question of whether there's impairment, substantial interference, or undue interference? And if so, when do you get no in the potential for substantial interference that would send you water in the middle?
Okay, so everything, how to address this sequentially. So what the groundwater review will do is make the finding of hydraulic connection, and then that, as the rules are written now, essentially means PSI exists because we've chosen a time period of the full expected duration of the water right, which is in perpetuity, right? We're assuming that people are going to apply for a water right and continually use it and pass that down to their descendants or transfer it, it'll continue to be used. And therefore hydraulic connection means PSI.
Means PSI.
Yeah.
So why put a separate PSI box
Yeah,
there?
and we put the separate PSI box there, right? This was Tammy's statement. So we've basically, as we look at it, hydraulic connection is a scientific term. So we make a scientific finding. PSI is a rule term. And PSI today means something different than we're proposing. And just because it's hydraulically connected doesn't mean there's PSI, because as Lisa pointed out, we've limited it in time, we've limited it in space currently. So right now they are different. We're keeping both terms because PSI is referenced in Division 33. That's the additional public interest considerations, and it's referenced in Division 505, which is the Deschutes mitigation rules. So we've kept the term PSI because that is functional elsewhere. Okay, and so functionally we're assessing both at once. The groundwater section review is never. Let me be careful here. Never say never. I don't believe that the groundwater section review will get to no in a water availability determination, because if we find PSI, then it goes down to the water right caseworker and they look at WARs and they get the water master input and they look at the rules. So they're the ones that are looking at the impairment, substantial interference, undue interference. And that, if that stream already has any of those, then additional impact from groundwater pumping is substantial interference, because we're impacting senior users that are senior users are already not getting their full allotments, and therefore if we add more impact to it, we're just making the problem worse.
Okay, so your examiner, the groundwater person,
Yeah.
is not truly going to make a separate determination of PSI. They're just going to decide whether or not it's hydrologically connected.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
I have a very simple idea,
Yeah.
which is make the hydrological connection box a /PSI box. Because really you're saying hydrological connection means PSI,
Yeah,
and they're just making that determination.
yeah,
That allows you to keep the PSI, it allows everything in here
yeah,
to stay as is. But just puts that, makes it clear that that is what's going on, because that's the whole thrust.
Yeah.
Of this movement.
Yep.
So I think we should make it very explicit that that's what's happening.
So I think,
And we can do that in preamble. I mean, it doesn't have to be done.
well, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
but let's just.
Okay. All right, so
We'll look at it.
noted, yeah, I'll throw out there, there's also scenic waterways that don't rely on PSI and rely on hydraulic connection. So there's different parts of different statutes that rely on the two terms. So what that's worth. Okay. I
Are
don't,
there other comments in the chat? I don't see any.
Okay, I have to, Justin, Adam said, it seems to me, I don't know if you were saying this or not.
Yeah.
But if these new rules go forward and the Division 9 looks something like this.
Yeah.
It seems like you would save your staff a lot of time if they did hydraulic connection PSI and sent it down to the caseworker and stopped there.
Yeah.
Because there would be no reason for them to spend, an hour and a half or 5 hours figuring out whether, these water level things get triggered, because you already get to know. And so why do all that? So that,
okay,
what's the point?
all right. Noted, thank you. Let's see.
Sarah's got her hand up.
Okay, Sarah.
I just had a comment related to what's the point, whether you do different tests, if one of them says no, you can't have the water right anyway. I think the point may be that, if there was a petition for judicial review or a contested case, or, whichever it might be, that challenges one of the findings, if the others were positive, then you would know, rather than having to go back to the agency and perform the other tests. And so there might be some benefit to completing the review on all fronts rather than just focusing on one area. And if it's a no, we just move on.
So that is exactly why we do it now.
Yeah.
And why we're planning to continue to do that. So, yeah. And for transparency's sake. Okay. So that is, we removed substantial evidence again further down in the rule in Rule 40. And also noted that since we changed the definition of water is available, we could strike out this reference to 400. And we're just pointing back to definitions in Division 8, Division 300. And those were the only changes that we made to Division 9. So additional input on Division 9.
Does that mean we're leaving Division 9 at this point?
Yes, that means we would move on to Division 400. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a big picture question here.
Okay.
So let's picture a well now that is relatively far removed, at several miles maybe from, the nearest surface water source. So it's not, immediately obvious where it is you're looking for this potential for substantial interference. And the cone of depression is, has grown and is actually intersecting with several different surface water sources. And since we're in the middle column here, we acknowledge that, the water isn't generated in situ spontaneously, it's coming from somewhere. So somewhere you're pulling that water, right?
Yeah.
So the way this reads to me is as if there's one source, one surface water source that you're looking at. I can't figure out how you encompass the situation that I'm describing where, clearly somewhere, you're getting most of the water, right? So
yeah,
that is my question.
I believe so. So you're asking how would we deal with that situation? How do we deal with multiple impacted hydraulic?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So
I think it's a question of language, right? And whether or not we should say a surface water source or one or more surface water sources.
Yeah, and I guess part of the question is, when you start this whole thing, is that part of the kind of initial assessment that you're doing? It's like, okay, so what is our situation here?
So yes, currently, and yes, the vision for the future is we start with a conceptual model and describe, the flow system that impacts the location where the application looks to pull out groundwater. We currently identify, any hydraulically connected stream within a mile, that'll be different, right, for these new rules. Ultimately, we'll need to work out how that looks, and I'll acknowledge, we have not done that in the rule. That's something that is likely to be a groundwater reference manual section that says this is how we go about doing this for multiple streams. I do believe that the rules say, like, if there's impact to any already over appropriated stream, right? If existing users are already not able to get their fully allotted amount, then continuing impact is going to be detrimental, and we haven't set a threshold for that, right? We've considered various options, and what we're proposing here is there's no de minimis impacts if senior users are already not being satisfied. So, yeah.
Okay, so you just used this phrase, de minimis, that I suspect is going to come up. I would like to request a precise definition of that term.
From me right now?
Well,
That's
be used, and it's like, I don't know what it means.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I mean, we also got comments from Greg on wanting it to be a quote measurable impact.
Yeah,
So if you all have suggestions on what that should mean, this is an opportunity for you to offer that.
sure. So real quick, so my working definition is de minimis means, oh, it doesn't matter, right? Like it's
That's
small
what
enough
afraid
that
you're gonna say.
policy wise, we can sweep it under the table. And what we proposed here is that we in thinking about, again, the comments that Susan and Bill just brought up, there are existing senior users in a prior appropriation system that aren't having their needs met. And by issuing new water rights that will impact that source, we are making that problem worse. And is that what we should be doing under a grand prior appropriation system? And the proposed rules are no, right? Like a small impact is too much when we're already regulating off senior users, because those small impacts of any one use are cumulative with all the other uses, right? And so that's what the presented rules assume.
Yeah, okay, oh, okay, I'm glad to know that that's what they assume. I mean, I
Or,
think,
I shouldn't say assume, that's what they state.
okay, I wasn't actually getting that from reading it, because if like that term seems unnecessarily vague in a set of rules that are in other places quite quantitative, right? And so, you know, you can substitute, I mean, I don't think measurable really works, but you know, you can substitute an actual number, a small number. And you could say, you know, this, so if the stream flow capture in this particular instance is less than that small number, then this is what we're gonna ignore, right? But if, you know, and that's true if you got, say, one well and I don't know, pick a number, you know, whatever, half a CFS or something. But if you got, you know, 50 wells, of course, that are also at half a CFS, now you're up to 25 if I did that correctly. But, so that was one of my concerns, I guess, is how, you know, if you're making an assessment, and what you're telling me is that the way it's written right now, there essentially is no threshold in there for this, you know, de minimis thing that we do.
Yes. And I think, did you say there's some, Greg? And then Lisa, did you have your hand up? But let's go to Greg first. I'm just trying to see who's got their hand up. Greg, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I guess initially I had a question about by eliminating this, you know, by deleting substantial evidence indicates, are we eliminating the, you know, sort of the traditional or historical level of proof of preponderance of evidence? I mean, it seems like this opens the door to just say, you know, if there's any evidence, then.
So Greg, the answer to your question is no. We removed it because it's an evidentiary standard that applies to department orders independent of what the rule says.
Oh,
The same evidentiary standard applies.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And then I guess previous comments sort of, I guess, spurred thought, and that is when you're determining if senior water right holders aren't getting their customary or necessary use, is that based on the WARS system?
So that is based on the 5 components that are in impairment, substantial interference, or undue interference definition. So WARS is 1. If it's withdrawn in rule, if in-stream water rights aren't being met, that's also a WARS standard. If the water master has regulated off surface water users in the past, help me out on the 5th. Withdrawn and stream.
I think there's only 4 based on these boxes.
Yeah.
It's on page 25.
Yeah, so in any case, those 4, perhaps 5 items are listed under impairment, substantial interference, or undue interference. And
All right.
yes, WARS WARS plays into two of those at least.
Yes, thank you, Justin. Okay, so I guess I would just like to comment that the WARS system, as we discussed previously, is, I guess you could say, outdated. And I have some real concerns that the available flows shown on WARS are based on certain assumptions of existing uses that I think grossly overestimate what those uses really are. And so I think, it'd be worthwhile taking another look at that, because I really don't think that the data in WARS is reliable. That's really my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Greg. And we will be updating WARS. It's not going to be something that happens quickly, but it is something that we anticipate having completed in the next 6 years. So just to let you know, that is something that is a priority for the department.
Yep. All right. So unless there's anything else on Division 9, we'll go to Division 400.
Just one
Yeah.
thing, which is, in 0010, section 2, it says that these rules don't apply to exempt uses.
Yes.
Or if exempt uses are water rights under the system with the priority date of the well log. So, I mean, to the extent when these rules are talking about regulation, it seems to not include exempt uses unless you have a different system.
Okay.
I mean, I get
So,
it, I get it
like,
for the
I saw that.
allocation piece, but
Yeah.
not for the regulation piece.
Yes, thank you. So I saw that in your written comments. I will re-look at that with respect to the regulation piece. I will say that if we were to regulate exempt use wells, we would do that through a critical area. I'll have to think about how that relates to Rule 50 and that definition in 400 that we're going to come to here in a second, actually.
Okay.
But that exists, that ability exists. I think it's, I have to just take off. I think it exists explicitly in the critical groundwater area and in the Division 10 rules. If that's your concern.
Okay, I'll look at that.
Okay. Right, so 400 and 410, again, relatively light revisions here. We're now on the far right-hand side of the flow chart within the capacity of the resource. Division 400 is going to remain the same as presented in earlier RACs. And in Division 410, we made a minor edit to match our new definition of water is available. And so this is the one change we've made to 410, where because we've said water is available now means these three things: water levels are reasonably stable, no substantial interference with surface water, and within the capacity of the resource. We stated that here with these principles of the commission and taken out the over appropriation part. So I'll just say, at least in this bottom sentence, there's something that talks about restrictions on allocations of water for exempt groundwater uses may be considered. So we'll throw that out there. Okay, and that's the last bit of the new rule language.
Okay, I want to pause here and we are going to do just seek some input from all of you on the proposed statement of need, the fiscal economic impact statement, and the racial equity statement. We are going to have public comment at 11:30. So if you are a member of the public and you are online, please identify yourself in the chat so we can know that you would like to make a public comment. Glenn, are you gonna be commenting today? No? Okay. So with that, would people like to take a break? I mean, it's fine. Yeah, I think people are interested in moving through the material. You'll have to record it. All right, so as part of our notice of proposed rulemaking, there's some statements we have to prepare. First of which is the statement of needs. Go ahead and advance. So just a reminder about our objective. Again, we've got kind of the two-pronged objective, which I think Bill alluded to a little bit in some of your comments earlier, but you know, we're trying to protect the resource in a more sustainable manner, as well as protect existing water rights holders. So with that in mind, these statements are meant to sort of deal with that two-pronged objective. So so we have sort of a straw statement of need up here, and we'll give folks a moment to kind of read through it. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, it's pretty short. If you have comments or questions, go ahead and offer those this time. Yeah.
So just looking at the way this is written, preservation of public welfare, safety, and health requires groundwater and depends in part upon the positive finding that water is available. That's meaning water not already allocated, not already under existing rights. That,
yes, yeah.
So all the people who already have water rights and are using them, putting them to beneficial use without waste, don't count in terms of, or I don't know, it just, the wording seems a bit unusual to me. It's ignoring the fact that there's a whole lot of water being put to good use that is serving public's welfare, safety, and health already. And that this is sort of, I would think that it would seem there's a way to make that clear. You don't have to have, if water is unavailable, that doesn't mean that you're not serving welfare, safety, and health of the people.
Yeah, I mean, don't you want something more like depends in part upon accurately determining whether water is available for future allocation or something like that, right? Is that what you're trying to get at there?
Now that you bring it up, I would suggest what I'm hearing is that we need to be explicit that the allocation of additional groundwater rights depends in part upon positive finding that water is available. And so we aren't saying that, well, you know, water is available isn't necessarily referring directly to welfare, right? It's should we issue more water rights is dependent on is water available in order to preserve public welfare that exists today. Did I capture your?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, if the waters of Oregon are being used efficiently,
yeah,
there should not be any water available. It should all be allocated to its socially desirable, highest and best sustainable uses.
Right.
And I will say this language has come from, you know, reports to the commission, and this is a new language, so it's good to get your input on how to refine it and improve it. Sure. Susan, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Susan Smith, Willamette Hall. I think a more direct message would be that the prior allocation system is designed to assure that all water in Oregon is used to its best use, whatever you want to say that. And then say, we have in many parts of the state all of the available water is already appropriated. And we want to avoid creating rights that can't be exercised. We want to avoid the investments in rights that can't be exercised. And so for new applications, we need to be careful about issuing new rights and make certain that they are issued only, in a manner that is more sustainable and protected. So I guess I would put out your train and watch it.
Thank you. I'm wondering if if we just struck that first sentence altogether, how would that read to folks? It's more.
It doesn't explain directed. It doesn't explain
The whole history
about
prior
this.
appropriation.
Well, no, you don't have to do the whole history of prior appropriation, but you have to explain why it is that the system needs this fix. And the reason it needs this fix is because you really are using all of this water in a good way. But, oh, by the way, it's all used. And I mean, that's why we're trying to do this. Whether, certainly we can have arguments about whether this is the right rule to achieve that, but that's why we're doing this, right?
Other comments from? I don't see anybody with their hand up.
I'll do the language.
Oh, that'd be great.
Laura, I just, in response to that, I would be, on behalf of Coco, I'd be very uncomfortable with this statement saying that we've used all the water and there's none left. I just think that's a pretty broad statement that doesn't necessarily apply everywhere for every groundwater resource in the state of Oregon. So I think that's an oversimplification and kind of the conclusion right out of the chute that the department shouldn't be making. I mean, to say that, the commission has directed them to do things and to avoid over appropriation or, I'm not exactly sure what the words are, but to come out with a conclusion like that is
That's why I said many areas of the state.
I think we've gotten some good feedback to be able to fine tune this. So Jeff, did you have your hand up?
I was respectfully disagreeing with my good friend.
Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, Jeff Stone, saying that all groundwater applications are now void because we've used up all the water. Gets to, at least that's how I took that. Plays into my paranoia from meeting number one, that this is what the end result is that this declaration, instead of looking at ways that we work with the resource to have serve multiple purposes. I think that we haven't even touched in a lot of cases the ability to use winter storage, winter water for other type of storage opportunities, because storage in and of itself has been deemed almost a dirty word. So I just would be careful that they don't look back at 2023 like a lot of people were looking back at 1988 and go, what on green's earth were they thinking? I mean, yes, I think in these type of declaratory statements, we need to be resolute about what the objective is, but try to keep some of those policy and action items out of it. That's the job of the commission and the job of the department.
Okay. Any other comments on the rulemaking statement of need? Bill?
So I would, I think I would point out that one could lean in the opposite direction of that and say that in fact, the idea that in terms of water available and being used and allocated to beneficial uses throughout the state does not recognize climate change, increased evapotranspiration, and the needs for the largest users of water in the state, agriculture, to have increasing applied water over in coming decades. And so in addition to not to saying, you know, we want to allocate all the water in the state now, I think we should be saying we want to preserve a buffer in recognition that over the next several decades, people who already have senior water rights are going to be pumping more water onto their fields because the alfalfa needs 10 or 20% more water 10 or 20 years from now. And so, you know, this future time frame, we raised the issue of the time frame in a couple of places, and it's been discussed, but I have not heard anyone give me a number. What time frame is this agency intending to focus on for making decisions about water availability? I think, you know, looking 50 years into the future would be a starting point in terms of what is needed to be ready for what's coming. There was a story last week. This is a bit of an analogy. Insurance companies in California have recognized that for decades, they've made determinations about insurance premiums and payments against wildfire for residential housing throughout the state. They've made those assessments of risk based on historical data. How often has there been a wildfire in this area? And they're just now realizing, you know what, we need to be thinking about the future wildfire risk when we set premiums for insurance for homeowners. And I think that similar change in perspective to be looking forward needs to be articulated and placed in, you know, in language in what we're doing here today. Otherwise, we're sort of ignoring something that is just fundamental and needs to be so that we don't 30 years from now look back like people look back at 1988 or 55 or whatever, so that 30 years from now people look back and say, well, they were forward looking. They recognized what the changes were coming as we know temperatures are rising, not just evapotranspiration among in crops in the fields, but the forests. I mean, the largest consumer of water in the Willamette Basin are the trees. The forests consume more water than cities, than farms, even than the biops in the main stem of the Willamette River. So I would like us to confront this problem.
Thank you for that comment. I am not seeing anyone in the chat, any member of the public who has identified themselves as wanting to offer comment. This is your chance to do that. And I think we need to move on to the next slide, please. I don't know how to operate with the. Okay, you're a lefty, that's why. Okay, so just confirming, there's nobody that wants to make public comment, right? Nope. It's 11. I don't want to rush through this. So. And I want to leave 15 minutes for the roundtable. So, and this won't be our only time to talk about this. This is kind of our important topic, so we need to delve into it. So. Part of the notice of proposed rulemaking also includes a statement about racial equity impacts. And again, kind of thinking about our two-prong objectives. So we've got protecting existing water rights and we've got protecting the resource itself. And I just put some bullets up here to kind of, and this is going to be more of a discussion. So thinking in terms of protecting existing water rights, what can we say as far as racial equity? Is the protection of existing water rights likely to improve, have neutral impacts, or make matters worse in terms of racial equity? Susan's got her hand up, so I'll call on Susan.
Susan Smith, no on the wall. I think if we include exempt uses within the area of water rights holding, that actually it is protective and will improve racial equity to go ahead and put these rules in place. Because what you find is that poor folks depend on shallow wells. And it has been the case that agricultural uses that drain down the water table affect these exempt users. And that's the way that I think it actually helps. I think you could also make the case that some of, I honestly don't know what the racial and ethnic character is of the existing agricultural water rights holders, but I think it's also probably the case that most of them are white settlers. And so that, you know, protecting those existing uses cuts the other way. But I think you need a more differentiated statement than.
Yeah, no, this isn't a statement. These are just bullets, Steve, people kind of thinking. So.
Yeah, so that would be my thought.
Okay. Somebody,
It would seem to me that to address this, we need information, we need data, we need to know what is the, you know, geographically and across income groups. You know, I look at research on environmental justice issues, mostly related to pollution and Superfund sites and that kind of thing. And the first thing you need to do is collect data so you can say something about who is disproportionately affected. The EPA's definition of environmental justice has to do with this being disproportionately affected. And so having information, maybe, I don't know that we have it now, but making an effort to collect that information might be one thing to do.
there is some good information out there. There have been some white papers at least done. I don't know if it's necessary to quantify the impact. I think we just need to say what that impact is and if it's positive, negative, or neutral. And I don't think we need quantitative data to reach conclusions about how maybe the fire appropriation system maybe has benefited some communities and people and not others. But certainly if you have data, and we'll continue to look for data, and again, there are several studies done by the state, several task forces that have looked at this very issue. And we can put those papers, I think, up for folks to see, you know, on our websites, you know, but
I'm familiar with the California data, but I'm not familiar with Oregon.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting a measurement, rather that if we have information that does confirm that certain groups are disproportionately affected in this way with this kind of water right or something, that would, at least in a qualitative sense, make that more.
some of it's just history though, right? So, but again, you know, we can pull together some white papers that do an excellent job of sort of summarizing the water rights system and the impacts that it's had on communities.
So if by history you mean
History of prior appropriation, how water rights have been issued.
Okay. With all due respect, the most senior water rights holders in the state of Oregon are the indigenous peoples. And so protecting their rights from intrusion by groundwater depletion is terribly important. And you can see that in the Klamath Basin. And so I think it's really facile to say, oh, well, you know, a bunch of white settlers moved in and established senior water rights. Yes, but now the system, because it protects the indigenous water rights, it's even more important to.
They might dispute that, actually. So I don't want to get into a debate about tribal water rights.
Well, I'm very familiar with the class. Let's say it that way. And that would be the position plan of thought.
Agreed. And I want to pause there. So we're going to be able to come back to this. I want to acknowledge that Representative McIntyre has joined our meeting today and put some questions into the chat. And I want to also just say, Rep. McIntyre, that we may just follow up with you one-on-one, but I want to at least share the questions with the group so people understand what Rep. McIntyre is interested and concerned about. So the chat says each basin and region is different. How do you plan to address those differences in this rulemaking? How will we work with community leaders to understand each area and its needs both environmentally and physiologically? How do these rules or rulemaking apply to areas going through the adjudication process? And then why now? Is this more about the environment and climate as opposed to people and balance? And so I think I'll broadly try to answer those questions. And again, we're happy to follow up with you directly, Rep. McIntyre. The rules right now, in terms of timing, these are a priority for the commission, and the commission directed the department to start working on this. And in large part, it's due to the environmental circumstance and the data that we are seeing. And I'll also just want to acknowledge that the process that is set up in rules is really intended to consider to create some standards that are uniform across the state, but consider local data in the decision making. So I think that's high level kind of an answer to some of your questions, and we're happy to follow up directly as well. So I have appreciated the discussion today. And I think I wanted, do we want to go to your last slide, Laura? Before we go to roundtable? I don't think so. We didn't get through this one, so I don't want to just rush through because there's also, you know, a discussion about how protection of our resource affects racial equity, and if they're, you know, if it's likely to improve racial equity. And so I've got some points up there to sort of generate thinking on it, but I don't want to rush the discussion. So I think we should go to the roundtable and come back to this. Okay, before we go to the roundtable, can we just queue up the last slide? So if people have thoughts that they want to send you after the meeting, they can share those as well. Well, we didn't even get into fiscal and economic impacts. That's a whole nother large topic. So again, obviously, you know, you can provide input on the slides at any time, but we're going to have the discussion, I think, let people interact. Okay, we go to the next slide, please. So I kind of just want to check in with everybody. And again, we both really appreciate the robust discussion. I will need the roster, please. And so I'd like to go through roundtable, and I'd like to alternate between somebody in the room and somebody who has joined us online. And if I might, can we start with you, Bill? Observations from the meeting? Anything else you want to say that you haven't said?
I think I've said quite a lot today, so I think
You can pass.
I'll pass.
Okay.
I'll take this time.
Casey. Any observations or additional comments that you have for the discussion today?
I have none at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Tammy?
So Tammy Wood, Oregon Lakes Association. I guess I'd just like to say on behalf of all of that, I think the department is moving in the right direction with these rules. I think that we're going to something that is much more science-based, which is a good thing. I think that the discussion of whether this would actually, shut off new groundwater allocations, really honestly shouldn't even enter into the discussion. It should just be a matter of we're making these rules based on the best available science, the understanding of the physics of the situation, and we have the goals of making this sustainable and protecting existing water rights users. And then as far as future allocations, the chips kind of fall where they may on that. And the one other thing I would say, the whole issue of climate change has sort of come up several times here, and how far in the future can we look? And it hasn't been clear to me where that is in the rules, if it is even there at all, or whether it can be inserted, or whether we're limited in that case to that objective statement that we had. So maybe we can address that at another time.
Okay, thank you. Cheyenne.
I have no comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Zach.
Zach Freed, Nature Conservancy. Just wanted to say I really appreciate the good conversation tonight. I think it was very productive. The Nature Conservancy also supports the department and the direction it's going. I think these rules are rigorous, they're evidence-based, they're important for the future of Oregon. I'm looking forward to talking more about the fiscal impact statement because I want to recognize that even within less than one county, there's more than $60 million of taxpayer dollars going towards mitigating the impacts of over allocating groundwater rights, referring here to the Harney Basin. And that's in addition to a recent proposed House Bill 3357 that was proposing to allocate $105 million towards reducing the impacts of groundwater over allocation. Layer on top of that, the $5.4 million towards domestic well remediation to domestic wells that are impacted by groundwater over allocation. You start to really build a case for how impactful and economically beneficial it is to avoid over allocation to the groundwater resource. That's just from an economic standpoint, not to mention the actual public health and public access, equitable access to safe drinking water and the importance of ecological water. So I appreciate the direction we're moving. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Okay, Dave. Dave
Yes.
Wildman.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. It's been a good discussion, lots of input. I've been pretty quiet as an engineer, just listening to some of the sides of it. I guess from the science-based engineering perspective, it does seem like we're putting a lot of reliance on data. And I think it's been noted that some of that data is not available. And so I have concerns about the overall implementation of some of these rules without the data to support it. So hopefully, collectively as a group, we can sort of support some of these discussions related to fiscal impacts and some potential budget increases for OWRD staff to begin collecting some of this data that's going to be required to actually analyze some of these impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa Brown with Water Watch. Yeah, I appreciate all this discussion. That was very interesting. Water Watch supports what the department's doing here. I think we're moving into a much more rigorous, science-based approach. I would also just comment that if you read the 1955 Groundwater Act, I think it was very forward-looking, and unlike some of our neighboring states, Oregon always sort of laid out these standards, reasonably stable groundwater levels within the capacity of the resource, and that what we're doing in this rulemaking is really sort of living up to those standards. So I really appreciate the effort going into it.
Thank you. Greg?
Hi, Greg Capillas here, Pacific Hydrogeology. There's not enough time for me to really say everything I would like to say. And contrary to popular belief, I don't really intend to dominate these discussions, but I guess I had one of my comments that really I don't think was addressed. One of my comments from the last meeting was in the Division 9 rules, where it says here, the potential for substantial interference with the surface water source exists if the well is under consideration over the full term of the proposed or authorized groundwater use, obtain water from stream flow depletion. And I felt that that was a little too open-ended over the full term of the proposed or authorized groundwater use. And I suggested that be, I guess, further defined. It seems as though, you know, for the purposes of allowing the groundwater department staff to be able to make decisions quickly and easily, they like to have kind of more prescriptive rules, and this just kind of goes away from that whole philosophy. And and you know, not only that, I just think it's way too open-ended. I think there needs to be some kind of time limit put in there to mean what, you know, what that means. What is the full term of the proposed or authorized groundwater use? And then I'd also like to point, and if I may just point make one more comment, and that is, in a lot of these areas where it appears that groundwater is over appropriated, because we're seeing a lot of declines in water levels. A lot of that, in especially within the basalts, is because of well construction problems that created commingling wells, and that's all.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And if you have suggestions on what time frame we should be considering, please share those. You can follow up with an email or written comment. Jen.
Jen Hubert with the Deschutes River Conservancy. I just really appreciated all the discussion today about all these changes. And appreciate the science-based look at sustainable use of our water resources. But also the comments about how climate change might impact future water availability, which I think is important to not address on this. And also about the comments about trading or impacting current economic uses for future economic uses, but just in general, sustainable use of water, I think, is very important.
Thank you. Kelly?
Thank you, Kelly Warren, Umatilla Tribe. I just generally want to say good discussion today, and I do agree with the overall objective of having a more sustainable groundwater system and protecting the existing water right holders. I'll look forward to the next RAC where we start to tie all this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan?
I've talked a lot. I guess what I want to say is I really appreciate how thoughtful the department is being in responding to all of the comments that are being made. And I think you are doing a fabulous job of trying to integrate all of that stuff into the rules. So you've done a very good.
Thank you. Lauren?
So a lot of discussion today. I appreciate how in-depth we've got, and I'm sure I'll have many more comments on that. I do have one comment, and I know we're not really talking about it today, but it gave me a little bit of heartburn, so I'll bring it up. On the last slide, where it talked about how non-consumptive in-stream benefits are enjoyed by all. I think that makes it appear that only non-consumptive uses are benefit all Oregonians, and I think that premise gives me some heartburn. Last time I checked, we all eat and we all wear clothes, and we all benefit from the production of food and fiber in the state, and also benefit from the fact that it's produced here. It reduces our carbon footprint. So I think that perhaps we should maybe reword that so it doesn't appear that only non-consumptive uses are benefiting all Oregonians. So thank you.
Appreciate the comment. Jeff.
Jeff, OAN. We covered a lot of ground today. Some of it I liked, some of it I didn't, but that's what having a rule advisory committee will produce. I still keep on thinking about where do we want to be and how to build the rule to get there. And so there are a lot of exits that we can get distracted on. And some of it's going to be beyond our pay grade. What I'm going to look at in total is how do these things, as they are applied, what happens, right? And there are a bunch of unknowns. I mean, things that we're just now getting a sense of with climate. There are opportunities to change how we look at water instead of the, still pack. Now we have it falling as rain. So I think it's incumbent upon all users to look at how do we maximize that, and how's that impact groundwater, especially with recharging of groundwater. I think there is a lot there that can be explored. But I appreciate the work. There are a lot of things that gave me heartburn today, but that's part of the process.
Hopefully it wasn't the coffee.
I am well amplified.
All right, we have one more person in the room and 3 people online. So I'm going to go through our Rules Advisory Committee members that are online, and then we'll have Adam wrap us. So Misty, any comments you'd like to share with the group?
Hi, thank you. 2 things that I can't wrap my head around. And one is that we're looking at regulating current and future uses for uses which require regulation, but at some point the exempt uses are going to continue to eat into the available water supply, which at some point seems like it impacts somebody who has a prior appropriation, and I can't really quite wrap my head around that. The other thing that I keep thinking of is, the water is all connected and it doesn't stop at the state water line. But if the people in the Klamath Basin in particular are being regulated by Oregon's rules, but California isn't doing the same things on their side of the state that we're doing, it seems like a inequitable, for lack of a better word. I don't know how to verbalize this very well, but that's where I'm a little stuck at in my mind. Thank you.
I appreciate that comment. I just want to clarify one thing, Misty, and that is this will do nothing to regulate existing groundwater right holders. This is all based on how we will evaluate future applications. So I just want to make that clear.
Yes, correct. But those people will, how do I say this? If there's exempt uses that continue unregulated, then at some point the people, I don't know, never mind. I can't quite spit it out very well. Never mind.
I think I understand where you're going and I appreciate the comment. So 3 more people online, Adam, and then we'll come to you. Phil.
Thank you. I am, and my comments will sort of maybe follow on to Misty's a little bit. As I'm generally supportive of the direction the department's going with this. I think improving the management approach to preserving the resource and making it more sustainable, that's well needed. As we're going through this, one of the things I keep thinking about, I mean, I've been a consulting hydrogeologist for more than 30 years, and I spent a lot of my time working on storage projects, MAR, ASR, sort of primarily what I do. So I appreciate the comments in today's meeting that focus on that, and making sure that we're not doing anything to inhibit that. It's not obvious to me that we are. But one of the things that goes through my mind when we're talking about these things, and in some cases we're alarmed because the results of this may seem drastic and restrictive to how we use water into the future and what impacts that might have on the economy and growth. And, you know, I've done a lot of my work in Washington State, and they've sort of been through some of these things already. They tried to bring the Washington State version of balance to their rules about allocation. And unfortunately, what happened there is that the courts took some of those decisions away from ecology in Washington State. So there were a couple of decisions that said, well, you know, the water is available or it's not. You know, we're supporting our in-stream flows or we're not. You can't keep issuing water rights, and mitigation that doesn't, you know, replace that water isn't, we're not going to allow it anymore. So the Supreme Court sort of took this whole management strategy away from ecology and made a very bright line. And then they did the same thing, Misty, with respect to exempt wells. They said, well, look, you know, you can't shut off agricultural uses and replace because they're impacting an in-stream flow, and then just replace that with a bunch of branchettes on exempt wells and pretend that that's not having an impact on water that's not available. So watching that sort of progress has brought two things to mind as I'm thinking about this. One, you know, doing nothing and continuing to write paper against declining water levels or against impacts to streams is, you know, it's probably not going to be supported in the long run through whatever means, and legally for sure. And number two, you know, the results of those decisions didn't necessarily shut down the market, and the state had a role in what happened next. And to echo something that Dave Wildman said in written comments last time, you know, it would be, I know we can't, but it would be great if we could focus on what we're going to do about these changes. I know that that's beyond the scope of the RAC, but if you're also thinking about what are we going to do next, I think it helps accept some of these changes. You know, the state in Washington State, they opened a new department, a new office, and their mission was to make more water available in areas that were depleted and shut down. You know, they both for ag, municipal, all other uses. And they did that by getting some creative with some water rights and really supporting storage projects, Yakima Basin Plan, Walla Walla Basin Plan, funneling federal money, funneling state money, recognizing that they'd had a role in getting to the problem state. And so they wanted to have an active role in sort of addressing some of those things. And so that's just my comment. I think that is what's next for Oregon. I hope that we shift the perspective from we support additional storage projects, bring us one and we'll help you permit it, to no, we're going to be an active partner in getting money to help build these projects. And I think that that's where Oregon needs to go in response to some of these you know, issues with respect to water availability and allocation. So that's my comment. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. And I'll just share for this group that the commission approved 4 feasibility study grants at its meeting on Friday. 3 of them were for aquifer storage and recovery or managed aquifer recharge. And we also do have the water supply development fund that can support those kind of projects. So Robin.
Hello, echoing everything everybody else said, my only additional comment is it seems like we still have a little bit of work to do on Division 8 regarding the reasonably stable groundwater levels and getting that to a point that it can be applicable to all our various aquifers. So I look forward to those discussions as well.
Thank you. Sarah.
I Hi. First, I guess just I wanted to thank staff. I agree with the comments that it's been really great working with you on this rule advisory committee, as well as the critical groundwater area rules that we did last time around. But regarding the regulations themselves, I'm going to have to rain on everyone's parade here. I don't think the existing rules are the problem. I think the problem is that the department doesn't have accurate groundwater and groundwater surface water hydrologic connection studies. And under the existing rules, we would be meeting the stated department's goal if we just had more data and information and the department actually did the studies that the legislature required in HB 2018. You know, the new rules, I don't think are more scientifically based. They have random numbers, just like the Division 9 rules. There's a lot of arbitrariness involved. And the new rules are going to suffer exactly the same as the old rules suffered from a lack of groundwater data. The only thing we're doing is saying, if we don't know, we're saying no. Instead of if we don't know, we're saying yes. And I don't think that's the right outcome. I think that it's the state's responsibility to find out the information and not just kick the can down the road by saying, well, we don't know. And so, you know, I am happy to be here and participate and try to make these rules as good as possible. But I don't think the underlying basis for these rules is correct. I don't think we should be spending state resources talking about new rules that kick the can down the road, rather than spending that time and energy and resources doing the scientific studies and being able to allocate groundwater responsibly. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Adam.
Oh, and I have nothing to say. Adam Sussman on behalf of Cocoa. Happy first day of summer, everybody. I've already said a lot, and I think what I mostly said is that the Deschutes Basin is kind of unique, special, and that these rules, we need to be thoughtful about how these statewide rules also address the Deschutes. It is probably the most studied basin in the state. We have numerous USGS peer-reviewed studies and models. So we really do understand the recharge, the use, the discharge. And so there was a lot of discussion today about protecting existing users. Okay, so when we have that discussion in the Deschutes, you have to have that in an informed way. And I wanted to put out there that Cocoa actually developed a white paper that talks about what drives water levels in the Deschutes Basin, not only on the decadal timescale, but also on longer term timescales. And I'd like to send that to Justin so that he could send it around to all the members of the RAC. So when we have a discussion about reasonably stable water levels and protecting existing users in the Deschutes, that we all come to that conversation with the same sheet of music in terms of information. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're happy to share information. So thank you all for your time today. Our next meeting is scheduled Wednesday, August 2nd. Same time, same place. If you would like to provide additional written input to the next iteration of rules, please get it to us by July 7th. And if you have a question from Sarah about the timeline, and if you have any suggestions on improving meeting logistics, please also share those via email. And let's take a quick look at the chat, please. I will say, Sarah, regarding the timeline, the timeframe for July 7th is due to when we have scheduled an opportunity for Department of Justice to review the next iteration. And so that is scheduled for the week of the 17th. And so that's what's driving July 7th timeframe. I will also say regarding timeframe, we heard loud and clear from this group at our last meeting that holding the public comment period on such a time frame that comments would be due January 1st was not ideal. So we will schedule the public comment period so that it does not conclude on January 1st. We don't have a definitive time frame yet. It'll just kind of depend on the evolution of this conversation. So August 2nd may be our last RAC meeting. I think it depends a little bit on what additional written input we receive from you on July 7th, by July 7th. So, and you've given us a lot to think about in today's discussion. So thank you.
Thank you.